The elderly man didn't say anything in response. Instead, he turned and cast his gaze toward the green-haired being's companion. This was a being who wore a suit of silver armor that was filled with sharp crimson spikes, all of which were emanating an odor of blood and gore. The foreign being was appraising them with an extremely wooden expression, as if he were merely looking at a pile of dead bodies. Even the elderly man couldn't help but shudder as he met the being's gaze. With his vast wealth of experience, he naturally knew that this being had to have mastered some kind of extremely powerful cultivation art. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been struck by a bone-chilling sensation at the sight of a being who was of the same cultivation base as him. The old man quickly cast his glance toward the surrounding the foreign being to find that, even though not all of the outsiders had banded together, there were over 10 beings clustered around him. He then glanced at his own side to find that even including Han Li, Yue Zhang, and the others, they only had around 7 or 8 people in total, and his expression became quite grim upon seeing this. Even if all of the beings outside of the silver-armored beings group were to side with them, their numbers would still only just about break even. However, aside from the 2 ninth-tier upper race beings among the opposing group, there were also 4 uppers beings of the 7th and 8th tiers. In contrast, the only upper race being above the 7th tier aside from himself was a burly man with disheveled hair who hadn't spoken this entire time. The elderly man heaved a faint internal sigh upon seeing this. He knew that this green-haired being only dared to act in such a bullish and demanding manner because they had an overwhelming advantage in power. Even so, he wasn't about to back down. A steely expression appeared on his face as he said in a cold voice, "Junior Yue has some ties with me, so I won't just stand by and watch as you take him away. Also, I want to remind you that this is Lightning Cloud Town. It's not a place where you can do as you please. Even if you want to invite Junior Yue to come with you, you have to follow the rules here." The elderly man's response seemed to be an unexpected one to the green-haired being, and a cold light flashed through his eyes as he asked, "Rules? What rules?" In this town, if a conflict takes place between 2 beings, then they have to battle one another in the town's arena. The loser will have to comply with the will of the winner, the elderly man replied. The green-haired being faltered upon hearing this before bursting into raucous laughter. "Haha, are you asking me to fight this little brat? Of course not. I forgot to tell you that according to the rules of the town, only beings of similar cultivation bases can battle one another in the arena. If you insist on taking Junior Yue with you, then you'll either have to find someone of a similar cultivation base as him, or I'll be fighting you in his place," the old man replied in an indifferent manner. The green-haired being faltered upon hearing this before a sinister expression appeared on his face, and he asked, "I have to find someone of a similar cultivation base. What kind of ridiculous rules are these? What if I refuse to abide by them?" "If you refuse to abide by the rules, then you'll be seen as a troublemaker, and the enforcer that has been deployed to this town by the panel of elders will evict you from the town, as well as ban you from ever being able to enter the Golden Devil Mountain ranges ever again. Do you want to oppose the panel of elders, fellow Taoist?" the elderly man countered. The panel of elders. The green-haired being hesitated momentarily before casting his gaze toward the silver-armored being. The latter furrowed his brows before suddenly raising his head and turning to someone behind him for confirmation. "Is he telling the truth? Is there really such a rule in Lightning Cloud Town?" "I can confirm that such a rule does indeed exist, Senior Gui. However, this rule had been established ever since the town had been first constructed, and it has been many years since anyone has mentioned it." The being who had spoken wore a black hooded robe that covered his entire body, and he seemed to be rather familiar with Lightning Cloud Town. Everyone immediately turned to him, with confusion in their eyes. This being had been enshrouded under those secretive black robes of his ever since he came to this place, and everyone had initially assumed that he was an outsider, but that didn't appear to be the case now. "Don't change the subject. I just want to know if the enforcer deployed here by the panel of elders really will intervene if I were to try and take that man by force here," the silver-armored being asked in a cold manner. "That's hard to say. It really depends on the personality of the enforcer. I've heard that the new enforcer that has recently been stationed here is a very dogmatic person, so there's a very high likelihood that he'll intervene," the black-robed being replied. "In that case, I really won't be able to take him by force here. All right, we'll do as you say then. After we get our Lightning Bane umbrellas, I will spar with you in person. If I win, then fellow Taoist Yue has to come with me. If you win, then I'll let him go," the silver-armored being proposed. The elderly man nodded with a grave expression upon hearing this, then turned to Yue Zhang, who wore a thunderous look on his face and said, "Junior Yue, I'll be taking part in this battle in your stead. What do you say?" "Senior Yan, they want me to go with them. I can't drag you into my mess. I'll fight my own battles. We'll just get them to pick someone else from their side." Yue Zhang immediately shook his head. "Pick someone else? Do I look stupid to you? Either he battles in your stead or you spar with me. Those are the only two options. There's no third alternative for you." The green-haired being sneered before laying down his own terms in a domineering manner. Yue Zhang remained silent upon hearing this, but his expression had darkened significantly. Han Li was spectating the situation with a calm look on his face when Xianxia suddenly transmitted her voice to him in an urgent manner. "Senior Han, we can't let them take fellow Taoist Yue away. Without his guidance, it'll be very unlikely for us to get to the place where the holy gray devilish beast is hiding during this period of mass devilish qi influx." Han Li's expression remained unchanged as he cast a glance toward her, to find that she was appraising him with an urgent look on her face. "You think far too highly of me, fellow Taoist. I'm just a seventh-tier upper race being. How am I supposed to be able to do anything?" Han Li turned away as he transmitted his voice in an indifferent response. Xianxia gritted her teeth and suddenly said something that came as quite a surprise to Han Li. "There's no need to try and fool me, Senior Han. My cultivation base is quite lackluster, but I do know some things, and I heard that you once slew several beings of the same cultivation base as you with ease while rescuing Senior Jia of the myriad ancient race, which means you're most likely far more powerful than even the average ninth-tier upper race being." Han Li's brows furrowed slightly, and only after a brief silence did he transmit his voice back to her in a slightly cold reply. "Looks like you've certainly done your research. All right, for the sake of the heavenly devilish armor, I'll help you again." "Thank you, Senior." Xianxian was ecstatic to hear this. In the next instant, Han Li suddenly interjected, "Are there really only two choices? I think a third choice would be better. Fellow Taoist Yue has already promised to come with us, so you won't be taking him." As he spoke, Han Li stepped forward and positioned himself in front of Yue Zhang. The elderly man and the people around him all exchanged surprised glances upon seeing this. The old man then appraised Han Li again in a rather hesitant manner, clearly concerned about his cultivation-based disadvantage in the face of this green-haired being. The green-haired being faltered upon hearing this before glowering at Han Li with fury in his eyes as he threatened, "Who are you? Do you want to die? Or are you planning to spar with me in his stead?" Before Han Li had a chance to reply, the green-haired being suddenly stepped forward, and one of his green furry hands came grabbing down toward Han Li. As his hand swung through the air, it suddenly swelled drastically in size after the green-haired being unleashed a certain secret technique, and the 5 fingers spread open to encompass Han Li's entire body beneath the hand. At the same time, yellow light flashed from his fingers as an enormous force weighed down upon Han Li. "Look out, fellow Taoist Han," the elderly man cautioned, but for some reason he intentionally delayed for a split second, thereby making it too late for him to try and save Han Li. Meanwhile, the green-haired being's hand continued downward with devastating force. If an ordinary early spatial tempering cultivator had been caught off guard by this attack, then the immense force emanating from the palm alone would be enough to completely immobilize them. However, Han Li's physical body had reached an insane powerful level, so he certainly wasn't going to be immobilized by something like this. Even if the pressure weighing down on his body were to increase by severalfold, it still wouldn't even be of the slightest concern to him. At the sight of the oncoming palm, a cold smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he reached out with an inky black hand before extending it upward. Gray light flashed before converging to form a massive gray hand of light that materialized overhead, grabbing toward the massive yellow hand. A violent look flashed through the green-haired being as he saw what Han Li was doing, and he roared, "Insolent brat, kneel down before me." He was only using around 70% of his magic power to unleash this attack initially, but now, his magic power was circulating rapidly throughout his body, and he was no longer holding back at all as he injected all of his spiritual power into the descending palm, trying to force Han Li to his knees with this devastating attack. Yellow light flashed from the giant palm, and it swelled in size once again as it crashed into the gray hand of light. However, in the instant that the two massive hands clashed, a completely unexpected turn of events unfolded. There wasn't any earth-shattering collision as everyone had anticipated. Instead, The yellow hand was simply crushed into nothingness by the gray hand amid a gentle thump. After that, the gray hand swayed before appearing in the air above the green-haired being, and it also came crashing down in a soundless manner. Before the hand had even reached its target, gray divine essence-effused light was sweeping downward ahead of it. "Impossible," the green-haired being exclaimed. It was incredible to him that Han Li had brushed aside his attack and was now retaliating in kind. In a fit of shock and fury, he abruptly clenched his fists together before throwing 2 punches at once toward the descending gray light with all his might. 2 yellow fist projections erupted from his hand amid a rumbling sound, heading directly toward the gray light. However, in the instant that the first projections came into contact with the gray light, they disappeared like sandcastles in the rising tide. A hint of astonishment appeared on the green-haired being's face, and he immediately tried to unleash a movement technique to take evasive measures. However, the gray light that was descending slowly just a moment ago suddenly sped up drastically, reaching him at an incredible speed before sweeping up his entire body in the blink of an eye. Within the gray light, the green-haired being felt the layer of protective spiritual light around his body solidify, and he was instantly completely immobilized. In the next instant, a crushing weight crashed down onto his shoulders, and the green-haired being was completely unable to oppose it as he fell to one knee onto the ground. The massive gray hand was actually still around half a foot away from his head, so it was weighing down on the protective spiritual light around him instead of his body, but that was still enough to completely immobilize him. The green-haired being's face paled before becoming extremely flushed, perhaps due to overexertion or humiliation, or a combination of both. The entire third level fell completely silent. All of the cultivators present, regardless of whether they were local beings or outsiders, were completely stunned by this turn of events. The elderly man with the Yan surname was also quite shocked, but also elated that Han Li was so unexpectedly powerful. In the distance, the silver-armored being's eyelids twitched, and he cast a frosty gaze toward Han Li. Meanwhile, Xianxia's expression changed several times in quick succession. He knew that Han Li was far more powerful than his cultivation base suggested, but it was still completely unexpected to her that he was able to crush a 9th-tier upper race after just a single exchange. This gave her rather mixed feelings. Yue Zong was also completely flabbergasted, and he stared at Han Li in silence, seemingly yet to process what he was seeing. As for the woman in the palatial dress and the others, they were naturally all completely dumbstruck. Han Li paid no heed to any of them as he fixed his gaze on the green-haired being, whose joints were popping and cracking from the strain of resisting against the massive gray hand of light. After being crushed into a half-kneeling position, the green-haired being was glowering at Han Li with both humiliation and resentment in his eyes. At the same time, the protective spiritual light around his body wavered incessantly, and he looked as if he wanted to forcibly rise to his feet. Han Li harumphed coldly upon seeing this, and he suddenly flipped his inky black hand over. Immediately thereafter, the gray hand that was weighing down on the green-haired being also flipped itself over, and a small mountain that was around 10 feet in size peered out of thin air before crashing down with a dull thud. The black mountain was completely mundane and nondescript in appearance, but not only was it able to completely vanquish the green-haired being's protective spiritual light, it completely flattened him onto the ground from his original half-kneeling position. After that, the small mountain swayed and swelled to around 30 to 40 feet tall, crushing the green-haired being's entire body beneath it, leaving only half of his head poking out from underneath. The entire pavilion tremored violently, following which a layer of white spiritual light surfaced over the floor and the walls. At the same time, a series of strange runes surged forth in a frenzy from all directions before disappearing a flash, following which the tremors came to an abrupt halt. A massive and extremely profound restriction had been set up in this ordinary-looking pavilion. Otherwise, the clashes that had taken place earlier would have been enough to raise the entire pavilion to the ground several times already. Han Li withdrew his arm as he looked down at the green-haired being beneath the mountain, and he asked, "Do I have a third choice now?" In the face of a being at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage, Han Li would normally have a hard time defeating them unless he were to unleash a few trump cards. However, this bullish green-haired being was overly confident in the power of his own body, and he refrained from evading any of Han Li's attacks as he engaged Han Li in battle in such a small area. As such, Han Li's insane strength and Providence true devil arts shone through immensely, thereby allowing him to crush his opponent with ease. When the green-haired being finally realized that something was amiss and attempted to take evasive measures or summon other treasures, it was already too late. In the face of the Han Li's immense strength and divine essence-effused light, he was only able to just barely ensure self-preservation, so there was no way that he could retaliate. At the sight of his companion being subdued by Han Li with ease, the silver-robed being's brows furrowed as crimson light flashed past his face, and the odor of blood and gore around him suddenly became more pronounced. He slowly rose to his feet, seemingly preparing to make his way toward Han Li, and the expressions of elation on everyone's faces immediately stiffened upon seeing this. The fact that he was completely unfazed, even after witnessing Han Li's display of power, indicated that he was far more powerful than his green-haired companion. The elderly man narrowed his eyes as he cast his gaze toward the silver-armored being, as did Han Li, but he remained completely expressionless as he did so. As the silver-armored being strode toward Han Li, the atmosphere in the pavilion suddenly became extremely tense. All of the other beings on the third level looked on with wide, unblinking eyes in anticipation of the potential fierce clash that was about to take place. Put your treasure away, fellow Taoist. This is the Lightning Cloud Pavilion, and fighting is prohibited here. If you want to spar, then you can go to the arena in the town that has been built specifically for this purpose. Otherwise, all of you will be prohibited from entering the Golden Devil Mountain ranges. An unfamiliar male voice had suddenly sounded from the staircase leading up to the fourth level, and the voice was quite a stern and unyielding one. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and the silver-armored being also faltered in his footsteps. It's the newly appointed Enforcer Min. Fellow Taoist Han, you should do as you're told, the elderly man hurriedly cautioned. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon hearing this, and he chuckled as he glanced at the green-haired being beneath the mountain, then made a grabbing motion toward the small mountain. Thus, the small black mountain disappeared amid a flash of gray light, as if it had been nothing more than a mirage, and the green-haired being immediately sprang to his feet with his face completely flushed from humiliation. He let loose a low roar, and he opened his mouth to reveal a hint of yellow light shimmering within, seemingly about to attack Han Li again. Han Li remained on the spot upon seeing this, and merely chuckled coldly in a derisive manner. "Stop, you're no match for him. Come back," the silver-armored being ordered in a cold voice. "He only got me because he caught me off guard. I'm going too." In his fit of thunderous rage, the green-haired being didn't want to listen to anyone. The silver-armored being's expression darkened upon seeing this, and he asked in a cold voice, "Are you going against my orders?" His voice wasn't very loud, but the green-haired being immediately shuddered as the fury on his place was replaced by horror, and he hurriedly replied, "I wouldn't dare." He then aimed a vicious glare at Han Li, before walking away and sitting back down on his futon in an extremely foul mood. "Seeing as you refuse to let fellow Taoist Yue come with us, then so be it. From what I overheard earlier, it seems that you aren't going after the immortal Xianxia anyway, so there's no direct conflict of interest between us. As such, I have no intention of fighting you here and needlessly wasting my magic power. However, if you dare to oppose me next time, then things won't end in such a peaceful manner." The silver-armored being threatened in a menacing manner, before also sitting back down on his futon. Han Li merely stroked his chin with a smile and remained silent upon hearing this. The elderly man and everyone around him heaved a collective sigh of relief. At this point, the woman in the palatial dress had naturally realized that she'd completely misjudged Han Li, and she smiled at him as she prepared to say something. But at this moment, Enforcer Min's voice rang out from upstairs again. "Aside from upper race beings of the 8th and 9th tiers, all those who want to enter the Golden Devil Mountain ranges must pass the examination. Those of you who want to enter the mountain ranges can come upstairs not, but only 2 at a time." Enforcer Min's voice was extremely calm, but his words immediately created a stir among the beings gathered on the 3rd level. Everyone glanced at one another before a pair of beings rushed up the staircase one after another, disappearing from view in the blink of an eye. One of them was a mid-deity transformation stage being, while the other was at the early spatial tempering stage. Neither of them belonged to the elderly man's faction, nor the silver-armored being's faction. The other beings were all quite disappointed that they hadn't reacted quickly enough. After all, getting a lightning bane umbrella earlier could only be better than getting one later. As things stood now, the remaining beings could only wait. Some of them were focusing intently on trying to hear what was going on upstairs so they could perhaps ascertain the nature of the examination. However, either a restriction had been set up upstairs or the examination was completely silent. In any case, no one could hear even the slightest sound from upstairs. This was rather disheartening to the beings who were craning their necks and listening intently. The duration of the examination wasn't very long, but it wasn't all that short either. After a full hour had passed, one of them beings finally came down from upstairs. Everyone immediately turned toward him in unison to find that his clothes were in tatters, and that he was carrying a few injuries, seemingly having just endured a battle with something. "Fellow Taoist Zhu, what was the examination about? Did you get a lightning bane umbrella?" one of his acquaintances immediately asked. "I did pass the examination, but Enforcer Min has prohibited me from revealing any details about the examination. Otherwise, my lightning bane umbrella will be stripped away. Also, everyone who has undergone an examination has to leave this place immediately, regardless of whether they've passed or not, so I have to go on ahead now," the slightly disheveled man replied in an ambiguous manner before hurrying downstairs without any hesitation. As such, the other people who intended to ask him questions could only sit back down in a sheepish manner. A short while later, the other person also walked down the staircase in a dejected manner. In contrast with the one who had emerged before him, this being of a lower cultivation base remained completely unscathed, but he seemed to be in low spirits. He didn't pause even for a single moment on the third level before continuing downstairs. After witnessing such a bizarre scenario, everyone suddenly became rather reluctant to take the examination early, and they all glanced at one another with hesitant expressions on their faces, clearly hoping that others would take the plunge before them. "I'm ready for the next two people," Enforcer Min urged from upstairs. Han Li looked around to find that no one had risen to their feet, so he stood up with a smile and headed directly toward the staircase. However, after taking a few steps, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him, indicating that someone else was also following him. Han Li seemed to be aware of who it was that was behind him, and without even turning his head, he said, "There's no need to be in such a hurry, fellow Taoist. You can wait for a while and better prepare yourself before taking the examination." "Rest assured, Senior, I've done some research on this examination, so I've come prepared," Xianxia replied from behind him. "You sound quite confident. It looks my concern was unnecessary." Han Li chuckled before making his way up the staircase without any further delay. Xianxia pursed her lips with a smile as she followed along behind him in an elegant manner. At the entrance to the fourth level was a faint red light barrier, and Han Li's body swayed as he passed through the light barrier, following which he appeared in an entirely blue place. The walls and the ceiling of the room were all translucent and shimmering with a faint blue light, and there was a massive white spell formation underfoot that took up an area of over 200 feet. At the very center of the formation was a man standing in silence while appraising Han Li and Xianxia. Han Li focused his gaze on the man to find that he had a scholarly appearance with a yellow book in one hand and a golden formation plate in the other. He appeared to be a being at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage, and a peculiar look appeared on his face as he said, "So it's you." "Do you recognize me, fellow Taoist?" Han Li asked with a smile. "Even if I didn't recognize you before, after that spectacular display earlier, I certainly do now. It's quite extraordinary that you were able to crush a ninth-tier upper race being so easily." The scholar mused with a hint of intrigue in his eyes. "You're far too kind, fellow Taoist. May I ask what kind of examination I'll be undertaking?" Han Li asked in a nonchalant manner. "Letter 1D65B, letter 1D493, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D500, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4F6. Examination. With your powers, there's no need for an examination. You get an automatic pass," the scholar chuckled. Both Han Li and Xianxia were rather surprised to hear this. "What? Do you really think I'm such a dogmatic person that I refuse to do anything outside of the rules and regulations? Even 8-tier upper race beings can be exempt from the examination, so you certainly don't need to undertake one. Here's your lightning-wheeled umbrella." As soon as the scholar's voice trailed off, silver light flashed from the book in his hand, and an object flew out from within, heading straight toward Han Li. Han Li made a grabbing motion to draw the object into his grasp, and he found that it was slightly cold to the touch. He looked down to discover that it was a small silver umbrella that was only around several inches in size, but it was an extremely intricate object, upon which was carved many profound runes. There are some things that I need to tell you, fellow Taoist. You must conduct the master recognition ceremony with the lightning bane umbrella in my presence to prevent it from being taken by others. Also, after completing the master recognition ceremony, the umbrella will only be effective for a month. After that, it will expire and become a useless object, which means that you must come out of the Golden Devil Mountain ranges within a month. Otherwise, the devilish chi in there will make you undergo devilification, and you'll be transformed into a true devilish being. Enforcer Min cautioned in a diligent and detailed manner. Thank you for your words of caution. Han Li nodded before tossing the umbrella up into the air, then opening his mouth to expel a small ball of blood essence, which quickly transformed into a cloud of blood mist that enshrouded the silver umbrella within. After that, Han Li began to chant something as he made a hand seal, then flicked his 10 fingers rapidly through the air in quick succession. A series of incantation seals of different colors surged forth in a frenzy, all of which disappeared into the blood mist. The small silver umbrella instantly swelled to 3 feet in size as a result. At the same time, a rumbling sound rang out from within the blood mist, following which the mist condensed into a series of crimson runes of different sizes. The runes revolved around the silver umbrella before disappearing into it in a flash, and a film of crimson light emanated from it before instantly fizzling out. After that, Han Li waved a hand through the air, and the silver umbrella shrank at his behest before flying up his sleeve. The entire master recognition ceremony was completed in what seemed like the mere blink of an eye. A hint of surprise appeared on Enforcer Min's face, clearly shocked that he was able to perform the master recognition ceremony so quickly. However, he quickly recomposed himself, then turned to Xianxia with furrowed brows as he said, I can see that you're a crystal being, and your cultivation base is quite low. If you were to enter the Golden Devil Mountain ranges, there's a very high likelihood that you'll perish in there. I suggest that you refrain from entering the mountain ranges for your own safety. Thank you for your concern, Senior, but I have to enter the Golden Devil Mountain ranges on this occasion. Please commence your examination, Senior, Xianxia insisted after extending a respectful curtsy toward the Enforcer Min. In that case, then I won't try to dissuade you any further. There are 2 types of examinations. One of them is to last an hour inside an illusionary realm conjured up by this formation, and the other one is to battle and defeat my 2 beast puppets. As long as you can do either of those, you'll get a pass, Enforcer Min introduced. Xianxia seemed to have expected this answer in advance, and she immediately replied, I choose the first type of examination. All right, then please take 3 steps forward, Enforcer Min instructed with a quick nod. Xianxia did as she was told, and Han Li discovered that after taking those 3 steps, she just so happened to be standing on top of a certain massive rune on the formation. However, before he had a chance to think anything of this, Enforcer Min suddenly said, You can go downstairs now. I don't want to have anyone spectate my examinations, and I'll have to ask you to refrain from revealing any details about the examination. Of course, I'll be taking my leave then. Han Li nodded in response before making his way downstairs. In the instant that he reached the opening leading to the staircase, a burst of restriction fluctuations suddenly erupted behind him alongside a faint buzzing sound. Han Li turned around in a nonchalant manner to find that the entire formation on the ground had been completely activated. Layers of white light appeared, completely encompassing Xianxia and Enforcer Min within, making it impossible to see them from the outside. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, but he continued through the light barrier without pause before walking down the staircase. As soon as he emerged on the 3rd level, everyone turned toward him, and he merely smiled before continuing down the staircase without any delay. Moments later, Han Li appeared outside the gates of the pavilion, and following a brief pause, he turned to look up at the pavilion behind him. This pavilion had a total of 5 levels, so what lay on the 5th level? For some reason, that strange thought surfaced in Han Li's mind. However, he then shook his head with a nonchalant smile before slowly departing along the street. It would be some time before Yue Zhang also completed his examination, so he was going to take a stroll around the town. Thankfully, the town wasn't very big, so it didn't take him long to see essentially everything that it had to offer. On top of that, he was also rather intrigued by the holy race being who was offering a reward for that immortal Xianxia. He didn't want to directly interact with this holy race being, but catching a glimpse of him from afar shouldn't be too difficult. With that in mind, Han Li continued onward down the street. There weren't many shops on either side of the street, and most of them were selling devilish beast materials. These shops were all rather small and also slightly dilapidated in appearance, clearly indicating that they stood in this town for a long time. Thankfully, there were some low-grade cultivators walking along these streets and visiting the shops from time to time, so at least they wouldn't go out of business. After passing through most of the street, Han Li passed by a large courtyard, and his eyes suddenly narrowed as a slightly solemn look appeared on his face. As his spiritual sense was sweeping through the area, it had been kept at bay by a strange restriction that had been set up here. Furthermore, the restriction was extremely profound, and even if he were to try and force his spiritual sense through it, he wouldn't be able to achieve this anytime soon. It appeared that this had to be where the holy race being was residing. With that in mind, Han Li couldn't help but take a few extra glances at this place. Unfortunately, the gates were tightly shut, and he was unable to see anything through the restriction, so he didn't know whether the holy race being was actually in there or not. Han Li didn't pause here for long. He merely took a final glance at the gates before continuing onward. Over an hour later, Han Li had strolled through the entire town and returned to the pavilion. Upon his return, he discovered that Xianxia and Yue Zhang were standing outside already, and there were no other people around them. Han Li immediately figured out what had happened, and he smiled as he asked, "Were you also exempt from taking the examination, Brother Yue?" "Indeed, Senior. When I went up, Senior Min told me that my reputation around these parts grants me an automatic pass. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to come out so quickly. On top of that, I must thank you for your intervention earlier." Yue Zhang bowed in a respectful manner with an expression of awe and veneration on his face. "No need to thank me. We need you on this journey, so I certainly couldn't allow you to be taken by others. Fellow Taoist Xian, you also received a lightning bane umbrella, right?" Han Li asked. "Of course. That illusionary formation is quite formidable, but I just so happen to have cultivated a few calming secret techniques, so it wasn't an issue for me to last an hour in there," Xianxia replied in a nonchalant manner. "In that case, let's set off right away. After all, we don't have a lot of time on our hands," Han Li suggested. "My thoughts exactly," Xianxia chuckled in response. Yue Zhang also nodded with a solemn expression. Thus, the three of them no longer delayed any further as they departed from the town and flew on ahead. After flying for several kilometers, they disappeared into the azure mist again. After forging ahead for close to 15 kilometers, the mist up ahead gradually thinned out. However, the rumbling thunderclaps up ahead were louder than ever. After emerging from the azure mist, Han Li couldn't help but draw a sharp breath at the sight that was presented before him. In the distance several thousand kilometers up ahead, the entire sky was flashing with azure lightning, and countless thunderclaps were erupting from all directions. They were about to enter a world where there was nothing aside from lightning. "Let's go," Yue Zhang said in a low voice as he opened his mouth to expel the small silver umbrella, and it transformed into a silver ball of light that enshrouded his entire body. After that, he flew on ahead, followed closely by Han Li and Xianxia, who also brought out their own lightning bane umbrellas. 2 hours later, 3 balls of silver light emerged on the other side of the world of lightning, and they appeared above a tall black mountain. The silver light faded to reveal Han Li's trio, and Han Li cast his gaze down below as he murmured to himself, "So these are the Golden Devil Mountain ranges." This was a place with extremely unique scenery. In the air around 3,000 to 4,000 feet above the ground, there was a vast expanse of gray devilish chi that stretched as far as the eyes could, and below that was a layer of dense black mist that obscured everything down below. There was a clear division between the black mist and the gray chi, and they coexisted alongside one another like yin and yang. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he looked down to find that only the tip of the mountain down below could be seen, while the rest of it was hidden within the sea of mist. There was visibility for only around 400 feet, and even then, the objects within that range were quite blurry and indistinct. If one were to try and look any further beyond that, they would only be greeted by the sight of inky darkness. After a brief pause, blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes as he activated his bright-sight spirit eyes, and everything in the black sea of mist within a radius of several thousand feet instantly became clear to him. However, Han Li's brows still furrowed, as he discovered that even his spirit eyes were unable to pierce through the mist all the way to the deepest part of the ground down below. As for his spiritual sense, he could only release it for several hundred feet down below before it was repelled. When he tried to sweep his spiritual sense toward the gray devilish chi up above, he found that the situation was even worse, as he was only able to release it for around 500 meters, thereby rendering it even less effective than his spirit eye ability. In that case, things were going to be rather troublesome. If they were to encounter high-grade devilish beasts that were proficient in concealment, then even he wouldn't be able to detect them in time. Just as Han Li was hesitating about how to proceed, Yue Zong turned to Xianxia and asked, "Fairy Xian, can you tell me where you want to go now?" "Of course. How will you guide us if I don't tell you where we're going?" Xianxia chuckled as she flipped a hand over, tossing a stone tablet that she'd prepared earlier toward Yue Zong. Yue Zong made a grabbing motion to draw the object into his grasp, then laid it against his forehead and closed his eyes as he seeped his spiritual sense into it. Meanwhile, Han Li had already ascertained that there were no devilish beasts nearby, and he withdrew his gaze before turning his attention to Yue Zong. Moments later, Yue Zong opened his eyes again, and a grim expression appeared on his face as he said, "So this is where you want to go. That's the deepest point of the outskirts of these mountain ranges. You've ventured deep into the mountain ranges on several occasions, so surely it won't be an issue for you to take us there, brother Yue," Xianxia replied with a smile. "If it weren't for the fact that we're currently in a period of devilish chi influx, this would naturally not be a problem. However, at present, going that deep will incur some risk. On top of that, this area is quite far away from the entrance, and the journey definitely won't be a smooth one," Yue Zong sighed. "We'll only be taking a slight risk. It's not like we're guaranteed to encounter high-grade devilish beasts. We've already made it here, so we can't just turn back now. You're quite familiar with the Golden Devil mountain ranges, so I'll leave it to you to decide on a route for us, brother Yue. All I ask is that we get there in around 10 days, Xianxia said. "You sure have a lot of faith in me, Fairy Xian." Yue Zong gave a wry smile upon hearing this before turning to Han Li. Han Li was the most powerful being among the three of them by far, and his display of power earlier had filled Yue Zong with awe and veneration, so he naturally had to get Han Li's opinion on the matter. Han Li was naturally aware of what Yue Zong was thinking, and he smiled as he said, "I don't have any suggestions or objections. I'll leave the decision-making to you, fellow Taoist Yue. In that case, I'll lead the way. If we go directly there in a straight line, we'll be incurring too much risk. In contrast, skirting around the outermost area of the mountain ranges will be a lot safer, but we might not make it there in time. Hence, we have to find a route somewhere in between the two. In doing so, we'll be able to limit the risks involved, but also get there in the required time frame," Yue Zong said after a brief pause. "All right, we'll do as you say, brother Yue," Xianxia readily agreed. Han Li didn't say anything, but he also nodded in response. Thus, after discussing some finer details with Han Li and Xianxia, then instructing the two of them on a few precautionary measures that they should take, Yue Zong forged on ahead to lead the way for the trio. Around 2 hours after they departed, 4 more beings rushed out from the world of lightning and emerged in a nearby area. The 4 of them inspected their surroundings in a cautious manner, then gathered together to discuss some things before a black-faced mid-spatial tempering stage being among them waved a hand through the air. All 4 of them then pulled out a formation plate each before flying toward a certain direction. After that, more and more beings entered the Golden Devil mountain ranges at intervals of around 2 to 4 hours. Some of them were alone, while others traveled in groups, and the largest of those groups was the group of outsiders led by the silver-armored being. The second largest group was that of the local cultivators led by the elderly man with the Yan surname. However, as soon as those 2 groups entered the mountain ranges, they immediately dispersed instead of traveling together. 3 days later, a dull explosion rang out at low altitudes over a certain location in the Golden Devil mountain ranges. Several balls of white light comparable in size to wagon wheels exploded in unison before transforming into gusts of fierce white winds. The winds screeched through the air, harboring countless blades of wind, and in the next instant, several cries of anguish rang out from within. Immediately thereafter, several tens of sections of furry remains plummeted from above, disappearing into the sea of mist down below in the blink of an eye. The fierce winds then disappeared into nothingness. 3 humanoid figures appeared thereafter, one of whom was holding a white bead in his hand with a grave expression on his face. This man was none other than Yue Zhang. Han Li stood beside him with his arms crossed, hovering in midair in an expressionless manner. Meanwhile, Xianxia had donned a suit of red armor, and an inky black bird with a fiery red beak and a pair of shimmering golden eyes was perched on her shoulder. Yue Zhang stowed away the bead in his hand as he heaved a faint sigh, and the residual winds in the area completely vanished. "Something's not quite right," Yue Zhang said in a grave voice. "What do you mean, Brother Yue? We've only encountered a few low-grade devilish beasts, haven't we? It's not like we haven't encountered other low-grade devilish beasts up to this point," Xianxia asked in a perplexed manner. Everything would naturally be fine if these were just normal low-grade devilish beasts, but these devilish ravens have always resided deep in the mountain ranges and never appeared in the outskirts. These devilish ravens share a symbiotic relationship with the high-grade devilish beasts, the Cerberus badgers. If one of them appears, then others shouldn't be far away, either. This is why I asked the two of you to be on your guard even though we were only dealing with low-grade devilish beasts, Yue Zhang explained. Xianxia faltered slightly upon hearing this before asking, could it be that these devilish birds have always been able to travel on their own, but it's only rather rare, so you've never seen it happen before? Definitely not. These devilish ravens are the most common devilish birds deep within the mountain ranges, and countless explorers have entered these mountain ranges before and after me, and none of them have seen these birds on the outskirts here, Yue Zhang immediately replied with a shake of his head. So what could it mean for these birds to appear here? Han Li suddenly asked. After a brief pause, Yue Zhang replied, it means that the Cerberus badgers with whom these birds share a symbiotic relationship have already perished, and they weren't able to find other Cerberus badgers. As such, they were unable to survive deep within the mountain ranges, thereby forcing them onto the outskirts here. Alternatively, it could mean that these birds have been forced against their will to come here by beings that are far more powerful than the Cerberus badgers. Oh, which one of those scenarios is more plausible in your opinion, fellow Taoist Yu? Han Li asked with a nonchalant smile. The first scenario is very unlikely. After all, these devilish ravens are low-grade devilish beasts, and they can fly pretty fast, but they're certainly far from powerful. Without any Cerberus badgers protecting them, it's very unlikely that they would have escaped all the way here deep within the mountain ranges alive. The other devilish beasts within the mountain ranges would have hunted them down long before this, Yue Zhang replied. So that means these devilish ravens have most likely been forced here by another powerful devilish beast, and that devilish beast is already onto us, Han Li mused as his eyes narrowed. I'm afraid so. On top of that, this devilish beast appears to be quite intelligent as well, Yue Zhang replied in a solemn manner. What do you think we should do in this situation, fellow Taoist Yue? Xianxia asked with furrowed brows. I suggest we speed up first to see if we can throw it off our trail. After all, seeing as this beast possesses a high level of intelligence, perhaps it appeared here for some other reason rather than to hunt us down. If that doesn't work, then we'll have no choice but to kill it. Otherwise, if it attracts other devilish beasts here or continues to tail us, it'll always be a thorn in our sides. Of course, I'm only able to make the second suggestion because Senior Han is with us. If I were alone, then I'd have to employ some other measures. However, those measures are very time-consuming to implement, so they won't be suitable for our current situation, Yue Zhang replied while giving Han Li an offhand compliment. A hint of a smile appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this, but he didn't give Yue Zhang a direct response. Instead, he turned to Xianxia and asked, what do you think of this suggestion, Fairy Xian? Brother Yue's understanding of the devilish beasts here definitely far outstrips mine, and with your powers, we have nothing to fear as long as we don't encounter any holy-grade devilish beasts, Xianxia replied in a smile. In that case, I don't have any objections either, Han Li agreed with a nod. All right, then let's keep going. It's a pity that we can't fly too fast here in case we attract attention from other devilish beasts here. Otherwise, if we were to fly at full speed, we'd be able to throw any devilish beast off our trail as long as they're not extremely proficient in flight, Yue Zhang mused in a slightly forlorn manner. That was quite true. Needless to say, Han Li was flying well within himself, and Yue Zhang standing atop a white wheel treasure that enhanced his speed to be comparable to that of a spatial tempering stage being. As for Xianxia, she had summoned a small golden flag, and during her flight, she could transform into a barely visible golden streak of light that could cover a distance of over 100 feet with every single flash, making her speed comparable to Han Li's as well. The three streaks of light hurtled through the air, disappearing into the distance in the blink of an eye. Almost at the exact same moment, at the foot of a small mountain close to 10 kilometers away, crimson light suddenly flashed. Immediately thereafter, a dozen or so crimson devilish eyes suddenly lit up at once in what was a pitch-black area just a moment ago. Hanli's trio flew for several hundred kilometers without pause, even disturbing a nest of black flying squirrels on a certain mountain along the way. These devilish beasts were like squirrels that had swelled to around a dozen times their original size, and each of them had a pair of bat wings, as well as a mouthful of sharp fangs, thereby giving them quite a vicious appearance. Of course, Hanli paid no heed at all to these low-grade devilish beasts. He didn't even need to take care of them on his own, as Xianxia did so in his stead. Countless specks of golden light suddenly appeared all over her body, and they shot forth in a torrential downpour, puncturing the bodies of these flying devilish squirrels, thereby killing them on the spot. However, Yue Zong was not elated in the slightest upon seeing this. Instead, after flying for a short while longer, he suddenly stopped and heaved a faint sigh as he said, "There's no need for us to fly any further, Fairy Xian, Senior Han. That devilish beast is still on our tail, and it's traveling quite quickly as well, so we definitely won't be able to throw it off our trail like this." "Are you sure?" Hanli asked as the azure light around him faded, and a slightly peculiar look flashed through his eyes. "I'm sure of it. I may be lacking somewhat in cultivation base, but I'm confident in my ability to sense and track devilish beasts," Yue Zong confirmed. Xianxian's expression darkened slightly upon hearing this, while Hanli also fell silent. In reality, he already knew that there was indeed a devilish beast pursuing them, even without Yue Zong's confirmation. Even though he was unable to release his spiritual sense very far, he could see the beast's indistinct figure through the devilish qi using his bright-sight spirit eyes. The beast was hiding itself within the black sea of mist and behind various mountains this entire time, but its massive body was not so easy to completely conceal. After conducting that test, Hanli's confidence in Yue Zong's credentials grew even further. It appeared that he really did have some skills that were very useful in the Golden Devil mountain ranges. It was no wonder that Xianxia insisted on hiring him. "Senior Han, it looks like we'll have to set up a trap to kill this devilish beast," Xianxia suggested in a cautious manner as she turned to Hanli. "Set up a trap? There's no need for that. Seeing as this beast is trying to hunt us down, I'll just have to kill it. Wait here for a moment. I'll be back soon," Hanli replied as azure and white light flashed behind him, following which a pair of translucent wings appeared on his back. He gently flapped those wings, and a loud thunderclap rang out as he shot forth as an arc of azure and white lightning. After just a few flashes, he had covered a distance of several thousand feet, and he completely disappeared from view after another dull thunderclap. Xianxian and Yue Zong were both rooted to the spot. Yue Zong quickly composed himself as a concerned look appeared on his face, and he mused, "Is Senior Han really going to face that devilish beast alone? There's no way that the beast is a holy-grade devilish beast, but some high-grade devilish beasts possess extremely powerful abilities that make them far more powerful than even beings of the same cultivation base. Senior Han must have some tricks up his sleeve, seeing as he's so confident," Xianxian reassured. Yue Zong didn't say anything in response, but his brows still furrowed slightly with concern. Right at this moment, a few resounding booms rang out in the distance, followed by a roar of shock and fury. However, the roar then immediately petered out into a blood-curdling cry before everything fell silent again. Yue Zong and Xianxian couldn't help but exchange a glance upon hearing this. Moments later, just as the two of them were beginning to grow rather uneasy, spiritual light flashed in the distant sky, following which a streak of azure light hurtled toward them. "It's Senior Han." Yue Zong heaved a long sigh of relief upon seeing this, but he wore a peculiar look on his face. Xianxian didn't say anything in response, as she fixed her gaze on the oncoming streak of azure light. After just a few flashes, the streak of azure light arrived in the air directly above them, following which the azure light faded, and Hanli was revealed. "Fellow Taoist Yue, can you tell me what devilish beast it is? It has a rather interesting appearance," Hanli said as he waved an arm through the air, tossing a black object that reeked of blood and gore toward Yue Zong. Yue Zong was rather taken aback by this request, and he hurriedly pointed a finger toward the object to keep it hovering in midair. Xianxian focused her gaze on the object to find that this was the head of a devilish beast, and it was comparable in size to a wash basin. At first glance, the head was quite furry with a pair of round ears attached to it, and it resembled the head of a monkey. However, upon closer inspection, a chill immediately ran down her spine, and she drew an involuntary sharp breath. The head didn't have a nose or mouth. Instead, it was filled with a dozen or so devilish crimson eyes that were all half-closed. Most of these devilish eyes were bleeding and harbored expressions of extreme shock and horror. Yue Zhang immediately identified the devilish beast that the head belonged to, and he was struck by a sense of shock, yet also a hint of enlightenment. That's the myriad-eyed devil. These devilish beasts are proficient in captivation techniques from birth, and they're quite rare even deep in the Golden Devil mountain ranges. It's no wonder that those devilish ravens were forced to do its bidding. Myriad-eyed devil. So that's why it kept blinking its eyes at me. It must have been trying to unleash a captivation technique on me. Tusk, it's quite unlucky to have tried something like that on me, Han Li chuckled in a nonchalant manner. Having said that, it's really quite amazing that you were able to slay this high-grade myriad-eyed devil in such a short time, Senior. Not only is this beast proficient in captivation techniques, it also possesses a few other troublesome abilities that make it quite a difficult opponent even for beings of a higher cultivation base than it. Yue Zhang still wore a peculiar look on his face as he spoke. Is that so? I don't know about that. All I did was kill it before it could unleash any of its abilities. On top of that, its magic power is only comparable to that of an upper race being at the 7th or 8th tier, so it's really not all that powerful, Han Li replied with an indifferent smile. Yue Zhang was rather speechless upon hearing this. I've heard some things about these myriad-eyed devils. Apparently, the most precious materials that can be sourced from its body are these captivating eyeballs. They are fantastic materials to be used to refine calming treasures. It's a pity that these aren't the eyeballs of a holy grade myriad-eyed devil. Otherwise, we'd be able to refine a treasure that's close to spirit treasure in caliber, Xian suddenly said with a smile. Surely you jest, fair Xian. If I'd encountered a holy grade myriad-eyed devil, I would have been forced to flee for my life. In any case, it appears that I was right to keep the head of this beast. The rest of its body has fallen deep into the black mist down below, so it'll be quite difficult to try and recover, Han Li replied with a faint smile. Seeing as this myriad-eyed devil has been taken care of, the rest of our journey should be a lot smoother. It's really quite fortunate that you were able to kill this beast, Senior. Myriad-eyed devils are very skilled in controlling and joining forces with other devilish beasts to attack its prey, and it's known for holding grudges, so we would have been in a lot of trouble had it have managed to escape. Even so, we shouldn't delay here any longer. Let's get out of here right away. After all, we can't ensure that the battle earlier didn't attract other high-grade devilish beasts to this place, Yue Zhang suggested in a cautious manner. You're right, brother Yue. Let's continue onward, Senior Han, Xian agreed with a nod of her head. Han Li also nodded in approval before sweeping a sleeve downward, upon which a swath of azure light swept past, and the head of the devilish beast abruptly disappeared. Thus, the three of them continued to forge ahead. Unbeknownst to the trio, less than half a day after they had departed from this place, a sharp screech suddenly rang out from another direction, following which a cloud of black mist surged forth from the air above, instantly encompassing an area with a radius of several kilometers. A sharp screech erupted from within the black cloud, following which the cloud tumbled and surged violently before a dozen or so crimson pillars of light shot forth from within to strike the sea of mist down below. The black mist parted to allow the pillars of light passage, and the pillars of light stirred up the area violent, clearing the black mist within an area of several acres to reveal a devilish beast's headless body. The lower half of the body resembled a giant green python, while its upper body was like that of a lizard. The beast also had a pair of arms, one large and one small, with sharp green nails on its fingertips. As soon as the body was revealed, a piercing cry of grief rang out, as if countless ghosts were weeping in unison. Who killed my son? I'm going to dice up their body and torment their soul for the rest of eternity. The voice was very sharp and unpleasant, but one could tell that it belonged to an elderly being. Ju Yi Wu Qi, find the being that took the head of my son, and will devour them bit by bit. The elderly being roared with thunderous fury. Yes. As you wish. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D6 9B, letter 1D5 5 6, letter 1D6 8, letter 1D5 6 8, letter 1D5 F2. Letter 1D4 1C, letter 1D5 FC, letter 1D5 FA. A male and a female voice sounded from within the dark clouds, following which the clouds parted to grant passage to two balls of light, one silver and one red. Two beings could be indistinctly seen within the balls of light, and they descended beside the headless body in a flash. The silver and red lights then receded to reveal a pair of half-human, half-beast monstrous beings. One of them had a pair of massive black horns on his head and a very burly build. His upper body was completely identical to that of a normal human, and he was wearing a suit of black metal armor, but he had a pair of beastly legs that were covered in hard black fur. His companion was a petite woman with a gorgeous facial structure, but a pair of green eyes and pointy ears. At the same time, she had a thin yellow feline tail protruding from her rear. The two of them descended onto the ground below and made a few laps around the headless body. Moments later, the man let loose a low roar and opened his mouth to expel a streak of black light, which disappeared into the body in a flash. Immediately thereafter, black light flashed from the man's giant black horns, and the headless body suddenly shuddered before it was entirely enshrouded within the black light. A ball of gray light then slowly hovered out of the body, before transforming into an extremely dull shadow that hung above the body in a completely idle manner. At this moment, the woman sniffed around her nose, and her eyes narrowed as she suddenly rose up into the sky before flying through the air nearby, seemingly in an erratic manner. "I found it. There was only one being who killed the young master, but it seems that there were two other outsiders nearby as well. Even if they weren't related to the young master's death, they're most likely companions of the killer," the woman reported in a respectful manner as she suddenly drew to a halt. "Very good. Can you find the killer?" the owner of the elderly voice asked in a cold manner. Of course, the three of them have all used secret techniques to conceal their spiritual power, but with the ever-present devilish chi in this nearby area, there's no way for outsiders to completely conceal their auras, so I'll still be able to track their location. The killer has gone in that direction, but his residual aura is already very faint, so they most likely left quite a while ago. On top of that, the devilish chi currents at high altitudes are very fast, so I'm not confident in my ability to chase them down, given how fast they're traveling, the woman replied in a truthful manner. HMPH, useless. The elderly man immediately flared up with rage upon hearing this. The woman could only stand on the spot in a resigned manner. At this moment, her companion also rose up from the ground below, and he appeared beside the woman after just a few flashes before extending a respectful bow as he delivered his findings. "Master, I've drawn the young master's residual soul out of his body and used a secret technique to simulate the killer's appearance." "Let me see it," the elderly being instructed in a cold voice. The horned man gave an affirmative response before sweeping a sleeve through the air, upon which a ball of intertwining gray chi and black light flew forth, then settled above his head. He then made a hand seal before casting a series incantation seals toward the ball of light, and the ball exploded to reveal a humanoid projection. This was a shimmering projection of an azure-robed man with a set of ordinary facial features. There was an inky black eyeball on his glabella that was swirling with an unsettling black light, and the man was naturally none other than Han Li. The projection only held its form for the span of a few breaths before it imploded and vanished. After identifying the third eye on Han Li's glabella, the elderly being gritted his teeth and said, "A law-destruction eye, eh? Looks like he really is the killer then. Only the spatial abilities of the law-destruction eye can prevent my son from teleporting away. Let's go." The horned man hesitated momentarily before asking, "Please forgive me for my rudeness, but may I ask if you're planning to go after the killer, master?" "Were my orders unclear?" the elderly being asked in a cold voice. The horned man hesitated momentarily again before replying, "Not at all. I just wanted to remind you of the purpose of our trip. The Patriarch is going to use this mass devilish chi influx to completely awaken, and if you get there too late, Tai Mo and the others could turn the Patriarch on you by fabricating some slanderous lies. In that case, you can land in some trouble, master." "HMPH, that Tai Mo has always been a thorn in my side," the elderly being harumphed coldly, seemingly in a disdainful manner, but it was quite clear that he was concerned about this as well. The elderly grappled with an internal conflict for a long while before finally deciding in a begrudging manner, "All right then, Ju Yi, you're proficient in tracking and concealment, so I'm going to send you after those beings. Find them no matter what you do, then stay on there firmly on their tails while I go and welcome the Patriarch as he comes out of seclusion. After that, I'll meet up with you and will avenge my son. If you still haven't found those beings by the time I reunite with you, you should know the consequences that await you, right?" The woman's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, but she then immediately lowered her head as she answered, "Yes, master." "Let's go, Wu Qi." The elderly then turned to the horned man before a massive azure-scaled hand reached extended out of the clouds. The hand made a grabbing motion, and the headless body down below was drawn into its grasp before it was withdrawn back into the clouds like lightning. "Yes, master," the horned man replied in a respectful before flying up as a ball of red light and disappearing into dark clouds in a flash. After that, a burst of rumbling rang out from within the dark clouds, following which it rapidly flew away. Thus, the pointy-eared woman was the only one remaining. When the dark cloud finally disappeared into the distance, the woman's furry tail curled up, and she raised her head with furrowed brows, clearly very troubled by the difficult order that had been assigned to her. In the end, she heaved a faint sigh and cast her gaze around her. After ascertaining the correct direction, her body swayed, and she shot forth as a streak of silver light. After flying for over 1,000 feet, the streak of silver light suddenly shuddered before slowly becoming more blurry and indistinct. Following one final flash, the streak of light completely disappeared into thin air. Elsewhere, a deity transformation stage being was slowly flying, alongside a spatial tempering stage being at a low altitude. Each of them was carrying a palm-sized formation plate, and they were stopping quite regularly to appraise the reactions displayed by those formation plates. The deity transformation stage being was a young man who appeared to be in his 30s, and he couldn't help but ask, "Marshal Uncle Wang, it's been quite a few days already, yet we haven't even caught a glimpse of the immortal Xianxia. Could it be that we've gone the wrong way?" His companion was a thin middle-aged man whose attention was entirely fixed on the formation plate in his hand, and he didn't even look up as he replied, "My divination technique doesn't have 100% accuracy, but it's correct at least once 20% of the times. I've conducted divination on several consecutive occasions, and this direction has been pointed out on all of those occasions, so we're definitely going the right way." 20% is exactly a high probability, the young man sighed in a rather dejected manner. At this moment, the two of them were flying over a pair of tall mountains, and both of them were in a completely identical state to the mountains they'd passed through before. All of the mountains here were inky black and remarkably smooth, with no signs of plant life growing on them whatsoever, as if they were all just piles of smooth rocks. As such, neither of them paid any heed to those mountains, and they were just about to pass through between the mountains when a startling turn of events abruptly unfolded. One of the mountain faces that they were passing by suddenly exploded, and a black blade of light that was several hundred feet in length suddenly erupted forth. Arg! The thin middle-aged was caught completely off guard, and he hurriedly opened his mouth to expel a white shield. The shield swayed before him, then expanded to several tens of feet in size before positioning itself in front of him. However, in the next instant, the black blade merely continued onward, slicing through the shield and destroying the middle-aged man's body without any impediment. What was quite curious was that despite how powerful the black blade of light was, it didn't harm the young man at all. The blade virtually skimmed past the young man's body in a flash, before disappearing into the sea of mist down below. All of a sudden, a loud rumbling boom erupted from within the mist, and a massive bottomless gulf that was over 100 feet wide was sliced into the ground. The young man may have been a deity transformation cultivator, but he clearly didn't have much practical battle experience, and only then did he react to the situation as an expression of horror and panic appeared on his face. He hurriedly made a hand seal in a clumsy manner before transforming into a streak of white light and flying back the way he'd come. However, right at this moment, a film of gray light suddenly appeared over one of the smooth mountain faces nearby, following which a sinister face that was over 100 feet in size appeared on the mountain face. The face opened its cavernous mouth, and a burst of yellow light swept forth from within in a frenzy, drawing the white streak of light into the mouth. Immediately thereafter, the massive mouth swung shut, and a gargantuan body that was as tall as a multi-story building slowly emerged from the mountain peak. This was a devilish beast with a gigantic head and a body that resembled a toad. The devilish beast's entire body was gray and completely smooth, and just its huge head alone took up half of its body, thereby giving it an extremely strange appearance. However, regardless of how peculiar its appearance, its gargantuan size made it extremely terrifying to behold. Right at this moment, a humanoid figure that was around 30 to 40 feet tall also slowly flew out of one of the mountain peaks. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that this humanoid figure was a man with large eyes and bushy eyebrows, contributing to a simple and honest appearance. The man wore a suit of azure armor, and there was a pair of black fleshy wings on his back that were flapping incessantly. Those wings were extremely massive, and when fully extended, the wingspan stretched to several hundred feet. There was not even a single strand of fur or hair on those wings, but they were filled with silver runes that were flashing erratically. Looking at them from afar, the wings seemed to be shimmering with a starry light, thereby giving them an extremely mysterious appearance. As soon as the humanoid figure emerged, the giant toad-like beast asked, "Master Taimo, those were just a pair of spirit realm beings. Why did we go to the trouble of ambushing them?" "No particular reason. It's just that it's been a long time since any beings have dared to venture into these mountain ranges, and I found it be quite strange that these two beings would suddenly appear here. This is a critical juncture in the Patriarch's awakening, so I don't want to see any mishaps taking place during this time. If there are any volatile factors that present themselves, we have to take of them immediately," the winged being replied in an indifferent manner. "I think you're overthinking things, Master. According to the agreement our Patriarch made with those top-grade beings from the spirit realm, this time period coincides with the 1-month period during which spirit realm beings are permitted to enter our mountain ranges, so it's no surprise that people would appear here," the giant toad beast replied. "All right, Ju-Chu, hurry up and use your soul-devouring technique to digest the soul of the being that you just swallowed. I want to know if they're actually just normal devilish beast hunters," the winged being instructed in a cold voice. "Yes, Master." At the sight of the hint of impatience that had appeared the man's face, the giant toad beast didn't dare to say anything further as it immediately closed its eyes. All of a sudden, a layer of 5-colored light began to swirl around its massive body. At the same time, a series of black runes appeared in the nearby air before also rapidly revolving around it. After around 10 minutes, the giant toad beast let loose a loud cry, and all of the black runes disappeared into its body before it reopened its eyes. "Master, I've ascertained the reason why they've entered these mountain ranges. They're searching for a wounded immortal Xianxia," Ju-Chu reported in a slightly peculiar voice, clearly a little taken aback by its findings. "Immortal Xianxia, what's that?" the giant winged man asked in a perplexed manner. "It's a sentient spirit Xianxia that can adopt a human form," Ju-Chu explained. "A spirit Xianxia that can adopt a human form. Is that true?" The giant winged man shuddered upon hearing this before an elated look appeared on his face. "I've already completely digested that being's soul, so this information is definitely accurate. Are you interested in such a thing as well, Master?" Ju-Chu scratched its head with a massive hand in a befuddled manner. You know about the humanoid devilish spirit of our elder devil realm, right? This immortal Xianxia has the same function," the winged man explained with excitement shimmering in his eyes. "It's comparable to a humanoid devilish spirit. No wonder these people have ventured into these mountain ranges. They're most likely all here to try and capture it. Wait, but these people don't actually know how to use the spirit Xianxia," Ju-Chu exclaimed. After pausing for a moment, the giant winged man instructed in a cold voice, "In any case, we definitely can't let something so precious fall into their hands, but I can't afford to delay here either as our Patriarch's emergence from seclusion is imminent. As such, I'll leave this to you. Go and gather a horde of devilish beasts and track down that immortal Xianxia for me. They're much more familiar with these mountain ranges, so they'll definitely be able to find the immortal Xianxia ahead of those outsiders. However, you have to remember to act discreetly so Du Yan and Zhu Bai's subordinates don't notice what you're doing. Also, kill all of the spirit realm beings that you encounter. We did make an agreement with those top-grade beings of the spirit realm, but as long we don't leave these mountain ranges en masse, they can't do anything to us just because a few people go missing in here. All right, then I'll go back immediately. These beings have some treasures that can track the immortal Xianxia, and even though it's only effective within a radius of 50 kilometers, we should have a better chance of finding the immortal Xianxia if we manage to take all of those treasures. The other person's treasure had already been destroyed, but the treasure belonging to the being that I swallowed is still intact. I'll give that one to you, Master." Ju-Chu nodded before opening its mouth to expel a formation plate that was shimmering with faint spiritual light. The winged being was quite elated to hear this, and he raised a hand to draw the formation plate into his grasp as he said, "I see. In that case, we really do have to kill all of the spirit realm beings in here. Otherwise, they'll constantly be competing with us to get their hands on the immortal Xianxia first. You can go now." "Yes, Master." Ju Chu replied in a respectful manner before suddenly descending into the sea of mist down below, quickly disappearing in a soundless manner. Meanwhile, the winged being stowed the formation played away, before flapping his wings and flying away as a streak of black light. 2 days later, two groups of foreign beings were hurtling through the air one after another over a strange area that was filled with massive trees that were each several tens of feet in length. The group up ahead was flying through the air atop a yellow spirit arc that was around 30 to 40 feet in length. Their group consisted of 3 beings, all of whom were blue-robed men. One of them was seated with his legs crossed in a completely motionless manner, seemingly having sustained severe injuries, while the other 2 had spiritual light flashing erratically around their bodies as they injected their magic power into the spirit arc with all their might. They were being pursued by a strange conical flying carriage that was entirely crimson in color. The carriage had been enshrouded within a ball of gray chi, and ghostly shadows could be seen flashing indistinctly within. There was only one humanoid figure on the flying carriage, who was wearing a suit of silver armor that was riddled with extremely eye-catching sharp crimson spikes. It was none other than the man with the Gui surname, who had almost attacked Han Li in the Lightning Cloud Pavilion. The man had his arms crossed as he looked on expressionlessly at the fleeing spirit arc, with a hint of bloodlust flashing through his eyes. The 2 groups flew through the air one after another, covering a distance of several tens of kilometers in the blink of an eye. However, the silver-armored being clearly held the advantage both in the caliber of his flying treasure and his magic power, so it only took a few moments for his flying carriage to close the gap significantly. In his desperation, one of the people on the spirit arc turned around and yelled, "Why do you insist on hunting us down, fellow Taoist? The 3 of us haven't wronged you in any way, and we're willing to hand over our tracking plates and exit these mountain ranges if you let us go." "Let you go? Of course I can do that. Hand over your blood and souls to me, and I'd be more than happy to let you go," the silver-armored man replied in a completely emotionless manner, and even though his voice wasn't very loud, it was clearly audible even from so far away. "You really are an abhorrent being," the blue-robed man who had just spoken cursed in an enraged voice. Thus, the chase continued, and the 3 blue-robed beings were becoming more and more panicked by the second. The 2 beings who were uninjured were already coughing up mouthfuls of blood essence to forcibly stimulate their latent potential, and even the wounded being was forced to inject his spiritual power into the spirit arc as opposed to focusing on recovery. Thus, the spirit arc accelerated drastically, making it slightly faster than the flying carriage behind him. However, before the 3 of them even had a chance to celebrate this positive development, the silver-armored being chuckled coldly as brilliant silver light suddenly erupted from his suit of armor. He then made a hand seal before abruptly stomping a foot onto his flying carriage, upon which an incredible turn of events unfolded. The gray chi around the crimson flying carriage tumbled and surged violently before transforming into a massive cloud that was several acres in size, following which a dragon's roar erupted from within. The 3 blue-robed beings all turned to examine the situation behind them with shock etched on their faces, and the sight that they were greeted by had them completely petrified. Just as they were turning around, crimson light flashed within the massive cloud, following which a silver worm emerged from within before disappearing in a flash. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted above the spirit arc, and the worm appeared out of thin air before swooping down in a vicious manner. The 3 blue-robed beings were all stunned by this sudden development, but they reacted quite quickly as they made hand seals and raised their hands up into the air, summoning 7 or 8 treasures in an instant, all of which flew up to attack the silver worm. In response, crimson light flashed from the worm's demonic eyes, and it opened its mouth to expel a crimson bead amid a crisp ringing sound. The bead rotated in the air before suddenly releasing a vast expanse of dark crimson light, and all of the treasures that were struck by this light plummeted from the sky amid wails of anguish. The crimson light continued downward, and the spirit arc had a yellow protective barrier around it, but that was instantly melted away by the crimson light like a thin layer of ice under the scorching sun. Immediately thereafter, crimson light flashed before enveloping all 3 of the beings on the spirit arc amid blood-curdling cries of agony. In the blink of an eye, the 3 layers of protective spiritual light around the blue-robed beings' bodies disintegrated along with their flesh and bones in a flash, reducing them to 3 fist-sized balls of blood. The silver worm opened its mouth, and a swath of crimson light swept forth, drawing the balls of blood into its stomach. At this moment, spiritual light flashed around the silver worm's body, and it took on a human form. It was none other than the man with the gooey surname. He raised a hand with a cold expression to wipe away the faint trace of blood on the corner of his lips, then cast his gaze deep into the ranges. Following a brief pause, he departed as a streak of crimson light. Elsewhere in the mountain ranges, there was a vast expanse of murky white mist to which there seemed to be no end. Compared to the gray devilish chi and the black mist everywhere else, this stretch of white mist stood out like a sore thumb. Han Li's trio was currently hovering before this stretch of white mist in silence, with contrasting expressions on their faces. "Do we have to go through here? Can't we go around it?" Xianxia asked. "I'm afraid not. In order to avoid that swarm of devilish wasps that appeared a few days ago, we already had to take a detour that wasted an extra 2 days. If we take another detour here, we won't be able to make it in time," Yue Zong replied with a furrowed brows. "But according to what you said earlier, there has never been any mist in this place, so this situation is really quite unsettling," Xianxia sighed. "It's not just unsettling. There are most likely powerful devilish beasts lurking in this mist, or perhaps this mist was conjured up by a certain devilish beast," Han Li remarked in a solemn voice. "With you on our side, even high-grade devilish beasts are nothing to fear," Xianxia chuckled as she turned to Han Li. "You're rating me far too highly, Fairy Xian. If there were only 1 or 2 devilish beasts in there, then I'd naturally be able to take care of them with no issues, but if there's a pack of them lurking in this mist, then I'll only be able to ensure self-preservation at most," Han Li replied with a calm shake of his head. "How could there possibly be a pack of devilish beasts in there? There are very few high-grade devilish beasts that are pack-dwelling creatures," Xianxia countered with a slightly forced smile. "That's not necessarily the case. This stretch of mist may be thin, but it's extremely vast in area, so it doesn't look like something that can be conjured up by just 1 or 2 devilish beasts. There's either an immensely powerful devilish beast in there, or there's a pack of high-grade devilish beasts lurking within," Yue Zong disagreed. Xianxia's smile faded upon hearing this, and only after a brief silence did she ask, "So what do you two want to do? Are you planning to turn back?" "We don't have to go that far, but what I'm saying is that we have to take extra care in there. If we encounter some dangers, it'll always be better to be prepared. If there really are beings in there that are too powerful for us to oppose, then we'll have no choice but to turn back," Han Li said with a smile. Xianxia's expression eased upon hearing this, but Yue Zong displayed the opposite reaction as he asked, "Have you decided to enter this mist as well, Senior Han?" "That's right. This trip is also very important for me, so I won't turn back unless there's a very convincing reason for it. Are you thinking about turning back, fellow Taoist Yue?" Han Li asked as he cast his gaze toward Yue Zong. Yue Zong hesitated for a long while before finally gritting his teeth as he said, "You saved me from those 2 beings earlier, so I owe you a great debt. If you're going to enter this place, then I'll accompany you, even if it means risking my life." Han Li merely smiled upon hearing this and didn't say anything in reply. Xianxia also smiled and said, "Seeing as both of you have made your decisions, then let's go in. If we encounter some powerful devilish beasts in there, don't worry about me. My cultivation base may be quite lackluster, but I have some trump cards that will save me in perilous situations, so I can look after myself. In that case, I have even fewer qualms about continuing onward." Han Li chuckled before leading the way as he flew into the mist as a streak of azure light. With his current powers, he'd be able to save himself even if he were to encounter a holy grade devilish beast, so he wasn't actually overly concerned about this thin mist. Xianxia and Yue Zong exchanged a glance before following along close behind him. The azure streak of light flew through the at low altitudes in an unhurried manner. Within the streak of light, Han Li was constantly surveying his surroundings with blue light flashing within his eyes. At this point, he had already activated his spirit eye ability to its maximal extent, and at the same time, there was a small translucent shield that was lowly revolving around his body with barely visible runes flashing on its surface. This was none other than the crystalline shield that he'd forged from the materials obtained after slaying that monstrous moth. In such a perilous place, he certainly wasn't going to hold back his defensive treasures. Yue Zong was flying along behind him with a pair of wheels under his feet, and he'd summoned a strange gray box. After unlidding the box, a strange insect with silver dots all over its white and chubby body was revealed. The insect bore a close resemblance to a silkworm, but there was a peculiar ghost face pattern on the top of its head, and the pattern was extremely lifelike, as if it were a living creature. As for Xianxia, she was still enveloped within a ball of golden light, but 8 palm-sized copper mirrors had appeared outside the golden light and were revolving around her body. These mirrors had antiquated patterns on their backs, while their mirror surfaces were shimmering with a cold light. Aside from these treasures, the two of them were also holding other things with their hands concealed up their sleeves. It was quite clear that the two of them were also aware that this misty area was potentially quite a perilous place, and they'd both made some preparations. Even Han Li was holding several azure lightning beads in one of his hands that was hidden up his sleeve. If they were to encounter any powerful enemies, he'd be able to immediately attack them with these lightning beads. The murky white mist around them was similar in nature to normal devilish qi, but it was naturally a lot less potent than the black sea of mist down below. At the very least, they didn't have to worry about devilification for the time being. However, Han Li's spirit eye ability was also greatly restricted here, cutting visibility down to only around 500 meters. As such, even though Han Li appeared to be quite calm, he didn't dare to grow complacent in the slightest. At the same time as he was scanning his gaze throughout the surrounding area, he had also released his spiritual sense to encompass an area with a radius of several hundred feet in case any devilish beasts proficient in concealment were to try and approach him. Thus, the conversation between the three of them gradually petered out as they entered the sea of mist, and the trio continued onward in silence. To them, the ideal outcome would naturally be to pass through this area, without alerting the devilish beasts that were potentially lurking within this mist. After flying for around an hour, their surroundings were still entirely enshrouded in faint white mist, and there were no signs to suggest that they were anywhere near making it out of this area. Han Li remained relatively unfazed in the face of this situation, but Xianxia wore a rather concerned expression, and Yue Zhang was also clearly feeling quite tense as he cast his gaze toward the strange insect in the box with increasing regularity. After flying onward for a while longer, a burst of short and sharp urgent screeching suddenly rang out from behind him. He paused in his flight upon hearing this before turning around to find that bright silver light was radiating from the box in Yue Zhang's hand. At the same time, the strange insect had raised its upper body, and its head was thrashing about violently as it screeched in a distressed manner. Not only were the silver spots on its body shimmering with bright silver light, even the ghostly image on its head had become an extremely vibrant crimson color. Yue Zhang's expression changed drastically as he warned, "This is bad. High-grade devilish beasts have appeared within 5 kilometers, and they're flying extremely quickly toward us." "Tell me which direction they're coming from," Han Li instructed in a calm manner. After listening to the insect screeching for a while longer, Yue Zhang hurriedly answered, "From the southwest, and there are 5 of them in total." 5, eh? That will indeed be rather troublesome to deal with. I wonder what kind of high-grade devilish beasts these are," Han Li murmured to himself as he cast his gaze toward the southwestern direction. All of a sudden, he rustled a sleeve, and 72 azure swords shot forth amid a crisp ringing sound. After that, he began to chant something before rapidly pointing at these flying swords. All of the small swords shuddered before abruptly disappearing on the spot. Immediately thereafter, a series of azure lotus flowers appeared out of thin air, and they were multiplying at an alarming rate. Specks of azure light began to appear high up in the air, and the azure lotus flowers rotated in unison before swelling to around 10 feet in size each. They connected to form an azure light barrier that obscured the entire sky nearby. An area with a radius of around 1,000 feet had been enshrouded under the light barrier. This was one of the Han Li's most powerful abilities, the Spring Dawn Sword Formation. Only with this sword formation was Han Li confident that he'd be able to trap several high-grade devilish beasts at once. He was naturally confident in his ability to kill these devilish beasts even without this sword formation, but he wouldn't be able to guarantee Xianxia and Yue Zhang's safety in that case. If a mishap were to occur or a high-grade devilish beast or two were to slip through and bypass him, those two would be in grave danger. Both of them were imperative to this journey, so Han Li naturally used the safest method. This a sword formation. With Xianxia's vast wealth of knowledge and experience, she was able to immediately identify the nature of the ability that Han Li had unleashed, and she faltered momentarily before an elated look appeared on her face. Yue Zhang was also ecstatic to hear this, clearly aware of how powerful sword formations were as well. Meanwhile, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air in an expressionless manner, and a swath of azure light swept forth. The light barrier up above blurred slightly before turning transparent, then vanishing without a trace as if it had never even existed. The mystique of this spring-dawn sword formation further boosted Xianxia and Yue Zong's confidence in Han Li. They glanced at one another before flying closer to Han Li, hovering directly behind him. Han Li didn't turn around, but he could sense that the two of them were still over 200 feet away and hadn't been impudent enough to draw too close to him. Right at this moment, Han Li suddenly heard a string of strange cries coming from afar, and as soon as this sound reached his ears, he was struck by a sense of irritation that made it difficult for him to concentrate. He was rather startled by this development and immediately activated his great development technique, thereby quickly restoring a sense of clarity into his mind. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D41E, letter 1D556, letter 1D604, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D680, letter 1D560, letter 1D55E. Meanwhile, Yue Zong and Xianxia displayed different reactions in response to these strange cries. Yue Zong's eyes suddenly became glazed over, and his cheeks became unnaturally flushed. His hands balled up into tight fists involuntarily before relaxing again, and he seemed to be quite confused. As for Xiao, a layer of azure light flashed past her face, and she remained completely immune to the effects of this strange sound. However, she was also quite alert in that as soon as she noticed that these were no ordinary cries, she immediately cast her gaze toward Yue Zong. After assessing his condition, her expression darkened slightly, and following a brief hesitation, she suddenly raised a hand. A talisman that she'd hidden in her hand in advance shot forth in a flash, then transformed into a burst of white glacial qi. Arg! Due to the fact that Yue Zong's reflexes had been dulled due to his confused state, he completely failed to react to Xianxia's surprise gesture, and his entire body was instantly enshrouded within the glacial qi. An icy cold sensation then traveled down his body from head to toe, and the sense of irritation that had welled up in his heart instantly disappeared. After returning to his senses, Yue Zong was naturally aware of what had just happened, and he cupped his fist in a grateful salute as he said, "Thank you for your help, Fairy Xian." "It's all right, but you have to be more careful, Brother Yue," Xianxian replied with a smile. After recovering full control over his cognitive abilities, Yue Zong found this situation to be rather strange. His cultivation base far outstripped that of Xianxian, yet she'd remained completely unaffected by those strange cries despite the fact that even he'd fallen prey to them. Could it be that she was carrying some kind of calming treasure of an extremely high caliber? Just as these thoughts were running through Yue Zong's mind, the thin mist in the southwestern direction suddenly tumbled and surged violently, following which several black shadows appeared in a menacing manner, each of which was around 10 feet in size. After just a few flashes, they rushed out of the mist amid a burst of unsettling cries, revealing themselves to a pack of devilish beasts that resembled vultures. However, all of these devilish beasts possessed faces of human women, yet each of them had 4 green eyes as opposed to 2 eyes that one would normally expect to find on a human face. As such, the beautiful female faces were given an extremely sinister appearance instead. Among the 5 devilish beasts, there were 4 with black and white feathers, and they possessed early spatial tempering stage power. As for the final beast, this one had snowy white feathers, and it was also the most powerful being in the group with a late spatial tempering stage cultivation base. "Cuckoo, look what we have here, spirit realm beings. This is great. The last time I had a spirit realm being was several hundred years ago." The most powerful white vulture beast was able to speak in an indistinct human voice that was extremely coarse and unpleasant. Han Li's expression remained completely unchanged, and he merely stood still on the spot as he appraised the devilish birds with a cold look in his eyes. However, this late spatial tempering stage devilish vulture seemed to possess an extremely high level of intelligence, as it didn't immediately attack Han Li's trio with its 4 companions. Instead, it was flapping its wings gently as it hovered in midair, appraising Han Li's trio from afar with its 4 green eyes to ascertain their power levels. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he suddenly raised a hand. 5 azure beads immediately shot forth, all of which transformed into fist-sized balls of azure light that reached the devilish birds after just a few flashes. The devilish vultures were slightly surprised by this sudden development, but all of them then dispersed following a command from their leader, trying to avoid having to face these attacks head-on. After all devilish birds were far faster than most land-dwelling beasts, and this was something that they were more than willing to take advantage of. However, a cold smile suddenly appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he abruptly made a hand seal. After missing their targets, the 5 balls of azure light suddenly changed directions at his behest, hurtling toward an area of empty space between the 5 devilish birds. All of a sudden, a string of resounding booms rang out as the 5 balls azure light clashed before exploding in unison. Loud thunderclaps rang out as countless arcs of azure lightning flashed through the air, instantly covering an area of several acres. The 5 devilish vultures were completely caught off guard and swept up in the explosion. The arcs of lightning crashed down viciously onto their bodies, inundating them in azure lightning in the blink of an eye. Yue Zong was ecstatic to see this as he stood behind Han Li, and he was just about to say something when a loud cry suddenly erupted from within the azure lightning. Immediately thereafter, 5 pillars of white light shot forth from within, one of which was thicker than the other. The pillars of light swept through the vast expanse of lightning, quickly nullifying the latter, following which the 5 devilish birds rushed out of what little remained of the azure light in a violent manner. All of them were letting loose enraged cries, having clearly been infuriated by Han Li's attack, and it was no wonder that this was the case. Aside from their leader, which had only suffered a bit of charring on one of its wings, the other 4 devilish vultures were all riddled without wounds and reeked of an acrid burning odor. They had managed to withstand that attack, but each of Han Li's lightning beads possessed power equivalent to a full-force attack from a spatial tempering stage being, so they certainly weren't going to emerge unscathed after being caught in an explosion of several such lightning beads at once. Thus, the 4 devilish birds that had suffered severe burns all pounced toward Han Li with irrepressible rage in their eyes, looking as if they'd like nothing better than to tear him into shreds before devouring his body. Meanwhile, the white devilish bird remained on the spot, appraising Han Li from afar. It seemed to have sensed that something was amiss. After a brief hesitation, it let loose a sharp cry to try and summon its 4 subordinates back to its side. But that split-second delay already made it too late. The sword formation that Han Li had set up was over 1,000 feet in size, and the 4 devilish birds were flying very quickly, plunging headfirst into the spring dawn sword formation in the blink of an eye. Immediately thereafter, azure light flashed, and a light barrier abruptly appeared, ensnaring all 4 of the devilish vultures within. The 4 birds were all stunned by this sudden development, and they circled around before grabbing viciously toward the light barrier with their talons. As soon as their talons struck the light barrier, it shattered like a pane of glass, giving away without offering any resistance. The 4 devilish vultures were ecstatic to see this, but they were then quickly left feeling flabbergasted. After the light barrier had been shattered, they didn't find themselves outside of the sword formation. Instead, they appeared in a strange space that was filled with azure lotus flowers. The lotus flowers were only around the size of a human thumb each, but there was no end to their numbers, and they created a seemingly impenetrable barrier. The 4 devilish birds glanced at one another before one of them suddenly opened its mouth to blast forth a pillar of white light. The pillar of light struck several of the azure lotus flowers in a flash amid a dull thump, but as opposed to being destroyed, those few lotus flowers swelled to several times their original size, now comparable to the size of a human fist. The 4 birds were all given a massive fright upon seeing this, and following that attack, the might of the entire spring dawn sword formation had also been activated. The rest of the light barrier instantly shattered on its own as countless azure lotus flowers appeared in its place. All of these lotus flowers began to rotate, and the 4 devilish vultures felt their surroundings blur before they found themselves in a forest filled with massive azure trees. Each and every tree was over 1,000 feet tall, reaching up to higher than the eyes could see, and their lush canopies of branches and leaves obscured virtually the entire sky. The 4 birds were situated at the deepest point in the forest. All of them were quite alarmed by this development. For birds like them, falling into dense forestry or rivers was one of their worst fears, as the movement techniques that they relied so heavily upon would be greatly hampered in such terrains. Thus, all 4 of them immediately spread their wings in unison, sending 4 balls of scorching white flames erupting from their bodies. These white fireballs then exploded to form over 100 palm-sized white fiery butterflies that flew toward the surrounding trees. These white flames were the trump card ability of these devilish birds, so they thought that these trees would be incinerated with ease. However, the fiery butterflies they'd conjured up merely passed through the trees, as if they didn't even exist. This is an illusionary technique. All of these devilish birds possessed early spatial tempering stage cultivation bases, so they had enough intelligence to immediately make sense of the situation. One of them was quite bullish and short-tempered, and it immediately flew toward one of the giant trees. However, the things manifested by the spring dawn sword formation were incomparable to those conjured up by other illusionary techniques. They existed in a state that was somewhere in between illusion and reality. Thus, the bullish devilish bird struck the tree that it was flying toward with a resounding boom, before bouncing back like a feathered rubber ball. Meanwhile, the giant tree remained completely unscathed, as if it were entirely forged from steel essence. The devilish vulture did indeed possess quite a powerful body, but after crashing headfirst into a tree at full speed, it was still struck by a splitting headache. Its three companions were all flabbergasted upon seeing this. Meanwhile, outside the formation, the white devilish bird was naturally both shocked and enraged by the disappearance of its four subordinates after they had flown into the light barrier. It let loose a loud cry before abruptly spreading its wings, and a halo of white light suddenly erupted from its body, following which all of its snowy white feathers were set alight. In contrast with the white flames conjured up by the four other devilish vultures, there were silver runes flashing within these white flames, and they were also far more scorching hot in comparison, raising the surrounding air temperature to an incredible degree. The spring dawn sword formation that had just been concealed was also forced to reveal itself in the face of such scorching temperatures, and the azure light barrier reappeared. Xianxia was initially elated after seeing the four devilish vultures being trapped within the sword formation, but her expression changed drastically at the sight of those strange white flames. "Look out, Brother Han. Those are golden crow true flames. Make sure you don't allow it to come into contact with your body. This devilish bird may possess some of the golden crow true spirit's bloodline." Golden crow true flames. Han Li's expression remained unchanged upon hearing this, but he was internally overjoyed. At this moment, the devilish bird up ahead had completely transformed into a giant fiery bird as it hurtled directly toward Han Li. Before it had even gotten close to him, a fierce wave of flames swept forth, and Han Li could see specks of red light appearing in the air nearby, following which countless pea-sized fireballs emerged out of thin air. The entire space in a radius of several hundred feet around Han Li had been completely ignited. However, Han Li paid no heed to this as he stood on the spot in a calm manner. All of a sudden, he took a deep breath before opening his mouth, and a silver fireball erupted forth before transforming into a silver fire raven that was around a foot in length. As soon as the fire raven appeared, the silver flames around its body flashed, and all of the miniature red fireballs that had appeared in the surrounding area converged toward it, ironically, like moths to a flame. The pea-sized fireballs disappeared into the fire raven's body in a flash, and the scorching temperatures in the surrounding area also instantly abated. Meanwhile, the silver fire raven had swelled drastically in size, and it flapped its wings before flying toward the oncoming flaming vulture in a fearless manner. Even though the fire raven had expanded in size, the devilish vulture was still 7 or 8 times larger than it, but that didn't faze it in the slightest. In the instant that the silver fire raven appeared, a strange sequence of emotions flashed through the devilish bird's eyes. There was initially a hint of fear, followed by surprise and elation, but most of all, there was a dominant undercurrent of greed and yearning. At the sight of the silver fire raven hurtling directly toward it, the devilish bird seemed to be rather hesitant about how to proceed, but in the next instant, a deranged look appeared in its eyes as it let loose a loud cry. The flames all over its body swelled to several feet tall, and it didn't hesitate any longer as it also pounced toward the oncoming spirit-engulfing fire raven. The two clashed amid a resounding boom, and white and silver flames intertwined with one another as the two fiery birds battled for supremacy over the other. As soon as the white and silver flames came into contact with each other, a peculiar crackling sound rang out, as if they were the bane of the other's existence. Despite the silver fire raven's diminutive stature, it was able to hold its own as it clashed with the massive devilish bird, and the two types of flames were constantly trying to devour one another. One moment, the silver flames would have devoured a burst of white flames, only for another ball of white flames to engulf those silver flames. Han Li only looked on for a short while before his pupils contracted slightly. He could see that his spirit-engulfing heavenly flames were superior in quality to the devilish bird's flames, but due to the severe disadvantage in quantity, it wouldn't take long for all of the silver flames to be completely devoured. Of course, he wasn't going to allow that to happen. Thus, he suddenly made a hand seal before pointing a finger toward the distance, and a thin pillar of azure light shot forth from his fingertip, disappearing into the fire raven's body in a flash. The pillar of light was so dense that it almost appeared to be a pillar of liquid, and it was of an extremely exuberant azure color. It had been manifested from the pure energy within Han Li's body. Astonishing scene then ensued. The silver fire raven's body began to expand at an alarming rate, first to 2 feet, then to 4, then 5, then 10. Within the span of just a few breaths, the silver fire raven had swelled to 30 to 40 feet in size, and as a result, the white flames being unleashed by the devilish bird were instantly forced onto the back foot. It was now the silver flames that were exerting their dominance over the white flames. An expression of shock and horror appeared on the devilish vulture's face, and it suddenly opened its beak to expel a white bead. The bead was flawless and of a pristine white color, and it was radiating piercing white light. This was none other than its devilish core, and it had decided to expel it from its body in the face of this dire situation. The devilish core was only around the size of a human fist, but as soon as it emerged out of the bird's beak, the light emanating from it transformed into thousands of thin needles that split up into 2 groups. One half of those needles instantly shot forth toward the spirit-engulfing fire raven, puncturing countless holes into its body. Meanwhile, the other half hurtled toward Han Li before crashing into the azure light barrier in a flash. These thin needles possessed extraordinary power, allowing them to pierce through the azure light barrier with ease before raining down upon Han Li in a torrential downpour. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this, but he remained standing on the spot as brilliant crystalline light suddenly radiated from the crystalline shield hovering before him. As soon as these thin needles of light struck the crystalline shield, they were refracted toward a different direction, thereby completely missing their target. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li made a grabbing motion without even turning around, and 5 skull projections appeared over his 5 fingers, following which 5 streams of flames of different colors erupted from his fingertips, all of which converged to form a sea of 5 colored flames. The thin needles were all swept up by the 5 colored flames before disappearing in a flash. On the other end, the spirit-engulfing fire raven's body was being punctured incessantly by the hundreds of thin needles that were flying around it. The puncture wounds were healed as soon as they were inflicted, but the needles were clearly still having a detrimental effect on the fire raven, as exemplified by the fact that the silver flames it was releasing were severely debilitated in power. Thus, the Golden Crow True Flames were able to hold their own against the silver flames once again. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he suddenly made a hand seal before abruptly rolling down onto the ground. All of a sudden, brilliant 5-colored light flashed, following which the loud cry of a phoenix pierced directly into the heavens. After the 5-colored light receded, a 5-colored phoenix was revealed in the place of Han Li. The phoenix abruptly swept a wing up ahead, and a thin white line appeared out of thin air. The white line warped slightly before opening up a white rift, and the phoenix flapped its wings as it disappeared into the spatial rift. At the same time, an identical white line appeared out of thin air right above the spirit-engulfing fire raven and the devilish vulture. The white line then split open in a soundless manner, and the upper half of the phoenix's body extended out from it. From the instant that Han Li had transformed into the 5-colored phoenix to the moment that he'd unleashed that spatial ability to appear above the spirit-engulfing fire raven and the devilish vulture, only a split second had passed by. However, the devilish bird down below had already been startled by the fact that the thin needles it had unleashed had completely failed to even reach Han Li, so it had been keeping an eye on him this entire time. As such, it witnessed the entirety of his transformation process, and a hint of fear appeared on its feminine face. After all, the heavenly phoenix true spirit was known as the monarch of all birds. Even the golden crow, which was also a true spirit being, would suffer from having its powers severely debilitated in the face of a heavenly phoenix. Of course, Han Li was only using his 12 awakening transformations to manifest this rainbow phoenix form, so it was completely incomparable to a true heavenly phoenix. Even so, it was undeniable that he had the true spirit blood of the heavenly phoenix within his body. On top of that, This devilish vulture was only a mutated bird that had inherited part of the golden crow's bloodline, so it wasn't a true golden crow itself. As such, in the instant that it sensed the unique aura released by the true spirit blood within Han Li's body, it was struck by a sense of irrepressible fear. On top of that, the spirit engulfing fire raven was also a very troublesome opponent to deal with in that it was able to devour golden crow true flames, which was the devilish vulture's trump card that had won it countless battles in the past. As such, the devilish bird immediately let loose a sharp cry as it blasted forth a pillar of white light, following which the white flames around its body receded as it attempted to flee the scene. However, the spirit engulfing fire raven was formed from the spiritual flame within Han Li's body, so it had a closer connection with Han Li than even his bonded treasures. Hence, it only took a single thought from Han Li for the silver fire raven to realize that the devilish bird was trying to escape, and it immediately opened its bead to expel a thin golden and silver thread. This was none other than the revolving evil spirit light. The pillar of golden light was as thick as a large bowl, while the golden and silver thread was as thin as a strand of silk. But as soon as the two clashed, the pillar of light was reflected directly back toward the devilish bird. The devilish vulture was naturally quite stunned by the fact that its own attack was being used against it, and it abruptly flapped its wings in a fit of shock and fury. Two bursts of white flames erupted from its wings, and only then was it able to just barely nullify the pillar of light. However, the golden and silver thread had also taken this opportunity to hurtle directly toward it. The devilish bird had been made aware of the fact that this thin thread possessed some strange abilities, and it immediately tried to take evasive measures. However, right at this moment, a loud phoenix cry rang out overhead, following which a vast expanse of azure light came hurtling downward at an alarming speed. Han Li had emerged from the spatial rift in his phoenix form, and as he swept his tail feathers through the air, he conjured up the oncoming swath of azure light. With the speed of the devilish bird's movement techniques, it originally would have been able to evade this attack. However, an enormous force erupted from the silver flames unleashed by the spirit engulfing fire raven, and the devilish vulture stalled in midair as it was caught completely off guard by the impact. As a result, the azure light reached rain down upon it in an instant. The scorching white flames all over the bird's body instantly melted away in the face of the azure light like snow under the warm sun, and as soon as the light enveloped the devilish vulture, it suddenly felt its body tighten and become extremely heavy and sluggish. The devilish bird was absolutely petrified by this sudden development, not just because of the restrictive force of the azure light, but also due to the fact that the golden and silver thread was now too close for it to evade in time. Han Li and the spirit engulfing fire raven had collaborated to perfection and placed their opponent into a dire situation. In its desperation, the devilish bird had no choice but to abruptly draw in a deep breath, upon which the white devilish core nearby suddenly flew back and positioned itself directly in the path of the golden and silver thread. It was planning to use its devilish core to keep the thin thread at bay, thereby indicating that it was extremely confident in the hardness of its own devilish core. However, an astonishing scene then ensued. As soon as the thin thread struck the devilish core, it passed through the object in a soundless manner, puncturing a small black hole at the center of the devilish core. A shrill cry erupted from within the devilish vulture's beak, and the white flames around its body suddenly swelled drastically once again. It flapped its wings in a thunderous rage, shattering the restrictive azure light around it before opening up some distance between itself and Han Li. Immediately thereafter, a pillar of white flames erupted into the sky from its body, and the power of wind was infused into the pillar of flames, instantly forming a sea of white fire. The devilish bird flapped its wings incessantly within the scorching white flames with a sinister expression on its face. Meanwhile, a massive bird projection that was over 100 feet in length abruptly appeared in the air with the devilish core at its very center. The projection was entirely golden in color with a pair of inky black eyes. It bore a strong resemblance to a crow, but it had 3 talons as opposed to 2. That's a golden crow projection. As expected, this bird really does possess some of the true spirit's bloodline, Han Li murmured to himself. At this point, he had already reverted back to his human form, and was appraising the golden crow projection within the sea of flames from his vantage point up above. Right at this moment, the devilish vulture raised its head and let loose a long cry. The scorching white flames around it immediately swept toward the golden crow projection before disappearing into the projection. Within the span of just a few breaths, the massive projection had absorbed all of the golden crow true flames in the surrounding area, and its body suddenly seemed to have taken on a substantial form, as a layer of white flames also appeared over its golden feathers. Within those white flames, silver runes were surging incessantly, and the flames seemed to be several times more powerful than before. The devilish vulture down below wore a vicious look on its face as it glowered at Han Li, and it was quite clear that it was preparing to unleash a powerful attack with the projection that it had conjured up. Strangely enough, Han Li glanced at the massive golden crow in the sky, then looked down at the devilish bird, and he suddenly chuckled as he pointed a finger at the devilish vulture before uttering the word "fall" 3 times in a row. The devilish bird faltered upon hearing this, but it then flew into a thunderous rage as it prepared to spring into action. But right at this moment, an unexpected turn of events suddenly unfolded. The massive vulture shuddered as a cry of anguish escaped its beak, and it suddenly plummeted from the sky. During its descent, its body curled up into a ball, and it suddenly turned a dark purple color while emitting a putrid odor. In the blink of an eye, it had been reduced to a puddle of purple liquid, and even its soul hadn't managed to escape. This was all due to the lethal poison contained within the revolving evil spirit light. Not only was this poison extremely potent, the target experienced no signs of discomfort in the initial stages following infection. However, compared to the monstrous moth that Han Li had slain in the past, this golden crow was far more susceptible to the effects of this poison. Not only did it completely fail to detect that it had been poisoned for so long, it disintegrated into a puddle of toxic liquid almost as soon as it discovered that it had been poisoned. Han Li was quite relieved to see this, while the silver fire raven let loose a cry of elation. Immediately thereafter, it spread its wings and swooped down before devouring the puddle of toxic liquid that the devilish bird had disintegrated into. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this, but he decided against stopping the fire raven after a brief hesitation. The true blood of the golden crow was quite precious, but the golden crow wasn't part of his 12 awakening transformations, so it wouldn't do him much good anyway. As such, it was better to let the spirit engulfing fire raven devour it. Perhaps it would undergo some kind of transformation. After all, this fire raven already possessed a high level of spiritual nature, so anything that it was so eager to devour had to be extremely beneficial to its evolution. After the fire raven devoured the toxic puddle, it didn't immediately turn back. Instead, it flew high up into the air. Curiously enough, after the devilish vulture had perished, the massive golden crow projection didn't immediately vanish. Instead, it was merely hovering on the spot, and the only difference was that its inky black eyes had lost all of their spark, making it appear completely wooden and soulless, just like a puppet. The silver fire raven rushed into the golden crow's body, then devoured the projection in a frenzy. Perhaps it had devoured too much golden crow true flames in one sitting, but after the fire raven devoured the final wisp of white flames, it reverted back to around a foot in size before immediately flying toward Han Li and disappearing into his body in a flash. Thus, the white devilish core and the shimmering thin needles of light were the only things that remained down below. Han Li certainly wasn't going to leave those behind. He swept a sleeve through the air, and a swath of azure light swept forth, upon which the devilish core and the hundreds of thin needles all disappeared in a flash. At this moment, Han Li turned to glance at the azure light barrier conjured up by the Spring Dawn sword formation, and a faint smile appeared on his face. He made a hand seal, and the azure light barrier shattered, following which the layers of azure lotus flowers disappeared. In the end, they reverted back to the 72 azure flying swords that hung in the air in all directions while emitting a faint ringing sound. At the center of the area surrounded by the flying swords were the remains of the 4 devilish vultures, and they'd been diced up into several tens of segments. Just the power of the Spring Dawn sword formation had been enough to kill these 4 early spatial tempering stage devilish birds. Han Li wasn't very surprised to see this. He merely flew over to the remains of the birds and paused momentarily before stowing the remains away in his storage bracelet. He could sense that the golden crow bloodline was really thin in the bodies of these devilish birds, but there were still barely detectable traces here and there. In that case, he could wait for the spirit engulfing fire raven to finish what it had just devoured, then feed it the remains of these 4 birds as well. After all, true spirit blood was extremely rare, even in the spirit realm, so he wasn't going to waste even a single drop. After doing all that, Han Li flew over to Xianxia and Yue Zhang as he said in a calm manner, "Everything has been taken care of here. Let's keep going." Yue Zhang had been looking on in a flabbergasted manner for a long while. In his heart, Han Li was indeed quite powerful, but surely he was only comparable to a ninth-tier upper race being at most. But what had just happened? He was clearly only a seventh-tier upper race being, but he had slain so many high-grade devilish birds with ease in such a short time frame. Furthermore, not only was there a ninth-tier upper race being among these devilish birds, this was a mutated devilish bird with true spirit blood in its body. Yue Zhang had truly been stunned to the extreme, and he was still struggling to believe his eyes. As such, he could only stare blankly at Han Li, with incredulity etched all over his face. As for Xianxia, she was also quite astonished, but she quickly returned to her senses as she said, "Indeed, Senior Han, this is not somewhere we should stay for longer than we have to. Perhaps there could be other devilish beasts lurking in the nearby area, so it's best that we get away from here as quickly as possible." Yue Zhang finally recovered from his stunned stupor upon hearing this, and he quickly nodded in agreement. Thus, the three of them continued onward. After that, they only flew for less than an hour before emerging from the thin mist, finally departing from that unsettling area. The three of them then continued without pause on their journey. Unbeknownst to the three of them, at the same time as they left the misty region, a streak of silver light shot forth from the distance before stopping in front of the sea of thin white mist. The silver light faded to reveal a petite humanoid figure with a pair of pointy ears, a long furry tail that was wagging gently behind her. The beautiful woman looked around before making a hand seal while chanting something, and the ball of silver mist suddenly erupted from within her body, then transforming into runes that quickly spread in all directions. The silver runes disappeared into thin air in the end, and a hint of elation appeared on the woman's face. This is definitely the right direction. If I recall correctly, those mutated human-faced vultures recently settled here. They possess the bloodline of the Golden Crow and their subordinates to Zhu Bai, so they won't be easy to deal with. That's a good thing. At the very least, beings won't be able to get out of this place easily. Within that in mind, silver light appeared around her body, and she flew directly into the mist. Over 2 hours later, silver light faded at the location where Han Li had slain the devilish birds earlier, and the woman revealed herself again. She gently sniffed the air in the area, upon which a hint of bewilderment flashed through her eyes. She then made a hand seal and repeated the same process from earlier, following which the bewilderment in her eyes grew even more pronounced. After pondering the situation for a while, she suddenly raised her head that let loose a long cry that was akin to the roar of a tiger, but also similar to that of a dragon. Even after maintaining her call for a long while, the surrounding area still remained completely silent, and there was no response to her cry. Thus her voice came to an abrupt halt, and she furrowed her brows tightly. A short while later, she shook her head and departed from this place. The direction that she was advancing toward was identical to the route that Han Li's trio had taken. Within a certain obscure col deep in the Golden Devil mountain ranges, thousands upon thousands of devilish beasts of different types had gathered, both in the air above and on the ground below. The largest of those beasts resembled small mountains, while the smallest were only around a foot in size each. At the center of the area surrounded by these devilish beasts was a huge rock that was several hundred feet in size. There was a devilish beast that was several tens of feet tall perched atop the rock, and it was none other than the giant toad named Ju-Chu. However, this devilish beast's body had shrunk down drastically compared to its original size, and it was looking rather mundane among this vast gathering of devilish beasts, among which many were far more menacing in appearance. The giant toad was perched motionlessly on the giant rock, seemingly waiting for something. The thousands of other devilish beasts in the surrounding area were all starting to grow quite impatient, but they were also willing themselves to remain calm. A short while later, the devilish beasts in the air suddenly parted to open up a path for a massive bat with golden patterns all over its body. The bat swooped down from above before folding his wings against its body, then stopping in front of the giant toad. "Master, the time has come, and we've gathered everyone that we could. All right, in that case, let's set off. Let me reiterate the objective of this operation. Kill all of the outsiders who have ventured into these mountain ranges and secure the formation plate-like treasures that they're holding. After that, Find this immortal Xianxia using those formation plates and offer it to Master Tai Mo. The one who finds the immortal Xianxia will be given a handsome reward," the giant toad instructed in a concise manner. All of the devilish beasts gathered in the call had already attained intelligence, and after hearing these instructions, they immediately set off. Some of them flew away into the air while others burrowed deep into the ground, and all of them traveled toward the outskirts of the mountain ranges. The giant toad itself also leaped away to join the search. However, unbeknownst to all of the devilish beasts present, there was a black shadow lurking within an ordinary-looking gray cloud that was hanging tens of thousands of feet above the call. The black shadow had a pair of flashing crimson eyes, and it was appraising everything unfolding down below in a cold manner. Only after all of the devilish beasts had left the call did it fly out from the cloud, thereby revealing itself to be a large crimson parrot. The parrot circled around in the air before suddenly self-detonating into a cloud of blood mist amid a dull thump. There was a crimson rune within the body of the parrot, and it disappeared in a flash. At the same time, within a stone chamber situated deep underground in an area where multiple formations had been set up, a crimson-robed man who was meditating on a bed suddenly opened his eyes. The man's face is deathly pale with a big mouth and a sunken nose, as well as a pair of dark brooding eyes. "What is that Taimo plotting at a time like this? Our patriarch is about to awaken soon, yet they're deploying so many beings to kill outsiders. And what is this immortal Xianxia? It must be something quite important, seeing as he's deployed almost all of the high-grade devilish beasts under his command to search for it," the man murmured to himself in a hesitant manner. Moments later, he suddenly clapped his hands together twice, and the stone door of the chamber swung soundlessly on their own. A woman with an elegant figure wearing a crimson palatial dress strode in through the door, but there was a layer of crimson mist that concealed her facial features. "Greetings, father." The woman extended a graceful curtsy after making her way over to the man. "Zhu Ying, have Tai Mo and Du Yan arrived at the Earth Palace yet?" the man asked. "Not yet, father." The woman's voice was a little low, but it was a relatively pleasant voice nonetheless. "They still haven't made it. Looks like there really is something amiss then," the crimson-robed man mused with a contemplative look in his eyes. "Have you received some news, father?" the woman asked in a curious voice. "I have indeed. All of Tai Mo's subordinates have been deployed," the man replied in a slow choice. "What, all of them, could it be?" The woman was quite startled to hear this. "It's not what you think. They've all been deployed to the outskirts of the mountain ranges, and they're preparing to kill all of the spirit realm beings who have ventured in this place," the man explained with a shake of his head. "They want to kill all of the spirit realm beings. Why is that?" The woman was rather confused to hear this. "This is why I summoned you here. They seem to be searching for something called an immortal Xianxia, but the Holy Patriarch's awakening is imminent, so I can't leave this place. As such, I want you to find out what the situation is in my stead and inform me immediately if you find some useful information," the man instructed as a cold light flashed through his eyes. The woman's heart stirred slightly upon hearing this, but she still replied, "Yes, father." After that, she backed out of the chamber in a respectful manner, and the stone door swung shut of its own accord. Meanwhile, the crimson-robed man heaved a faint sigh before closing his eyes to meditate again. In the air above a gray forest on the outskirts of the Golden Devil mountain ranges, a deity transformation cultivator was controlling 3 red flying sabers as he battled 2 devilish beasts that resembled black bears. Not only were these devilish beasts several tens of feet tall, they were able to unleash countless claw projections by swinging their paws through the air, and those claw projections clashed with the flying sabers amid a string of loud clangs as a fierce battle ensued. This deity transformation stage being was only barely able to ensure self-preservation in the face of these fierce attacks, but in the next instant, a peculiar cry suddenly rang out in the distant sky, following which a black cloud drifted forth. This was a pack of hundreds of horned black birds. One of them was around 10 feet in length, a pair of green eyes that were emitting a sinister light. The deity transformation stage being was absolutely petrified upon seeing this, but he was unable to do anything aside from manipulating his 3 flying sabers with all his might in the face of the 2 giant bears. All of a sudden, the 3 flying sabers flew back toward him before transforming into 3 streaks of light that shielded his body within. However, following a strange cry from the devilish bird leading the pack, the rest of them flew forth in a frenzy. The flying sabers were only able to slay a dozen or so of these devilish birds before they were torn to shreds. Even the giant bear-like devilish beasts weren't spared, as they were also eaten by this pack of ferocious birds. In the end, one of the birds suddenly opened its beak to expel a formation plate, and their leader's eyes lit up with elation upon seeing this, as it opened its beak to blast forth a burst of light, which drew the formation plate into its stomach. After that, it led the pack of devilish birds toward another direction. In the air above a small mountain, 5 leopard-like devilish beasts were attacking a yellow light barrier that had enshrouded the mountain's summit. Gray devilish chi was erupting from the mouths of the devilish beasts, causing the light barrier to tremor incessantly, and below the light barrier, there were 2 foreign beings each wielding a flag with all their might. Despite the fact that they were doing their best to maintain the light barrier, it was clearly on the brink of collapse. Elsewhere, above a stretch of empty land, the elderly man with the Yan surname and the pale-faced young man were flying through the air as quickly as they could as 2 streaks of light. Behind them, a strange green cloud and a gust of fierce black winds were giving chase in hot pursuit. As the 2 drew closer and closer, the elderly man's heart sank, and he gritted his teeth as he suddenly flipped his hand over to produce a slightly worn-out golden talisman. He chanted something before raising the talisman, and a ball of piercing golden light that resembled a scintillating golden sun appeared amid a resounding boom. Golden light radiated in all directions, creating a marvelous spectacle that also forced back all of the devilish chi in the surrounding area. The green cloud and the gust of black winds were also forced to stop in their tracks as a result. Moments later, the golden light vanished, yet the 2 men up ahead had also disappeared without a trace. Similar scenarios were unfolding all throughout the outskirts of the Golden Devil mountain ranges. Most of the foreign beings who had entered the mountain ranges had been killed by devilish beasts, and only a small number remained. All of the beings who had survived up to this point were naturally quite powerful, and after realizing that there seemed to be an abnormally high number of high-grade devilish beasts that were appearing in the area, all of them went into hiding and became extremely cautious. The devilish beasts that had obtained the tracking formation, plates from the beings that they had slain, all began to search through the outskirts of the mountain ranges. Letter 1D453, letter 1D633, letter 1D626, letter 1D452, letter 1D464, letter 1D452, letter 1D450, letter 1D45C, letter 1D45A. However, strangely enough, none of the remaining spirit realm beings nor the devilish beasts had even caught a single glimpse of this immortal Xianxia. At this point, after a few days of travel, Han Li's trio was finally close to their destination. Han Li stood atop the summit of a small mountain, looking into the distance through a pair of narrowed eyes. After a while, he withdrew his gaze and turned to Xianxia as he asked, "Is this the place that you were referring to? Why does it look so ordinary?" The wounded devilish beast chose this place precisely because it's so nondescript. "Brother Yue, your guidance won't be required for the rest of the journey, so take a rest somewhere nearby. Senior Han and I have to make a trip over there, and we'll be back in 3 to 4 days at most. If we're still not back by then, you can leave us behind and go back on your own," Xianxia said with a smile. "In that case, I'll be slacking off for a bit here." Yue Zhang nodded before cupping his fist in a salute, then flew over to a nearby small mountain before disappearing into the mountain peak. "Let's go, Senior Han." Xianxia took a deep breath as a solemn look appeared on her face. Han Li nodded before immediately flying toward that direction as a streak of azure light. After entering the mountain ranges up ahead, the devilish smoke bird perched on Xianxia's shoulder immediately spread open its wings before flying into the air, then heading toward a certain direction. Han Li and Xianxia followed along closely behind it, flying for several thousand kilometers before the small black bird finally stopped in front of an ordinary-looking mountain. After that, it began to circle around in the air above the mountain, while chirping incessantly. Xianxia's eyes lit up with elation as she said, "It's already found the entrance." Immediately thereafter, she flew on ahead and drew close to the mountain peak after just a few flashes. She then quickly flew around the mountain peak a few times before stopping halfway up the mountain, where she began to appraise something with a focused look on her face. Han Li flew over to her side and also cast his gaze toward the same direction. There, he was greeted by the sight of a mundane-looking gray rock face that was over 1,000 feet tall. The rock face was quite smooth, and aside from the fact that there was some black chi hovering close to it, there was nothing else that set it apart from any of the other rock faces here. However, as blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes, his expression suddenly changed slightly as if he'd noticed something more than what met the eye. At this moment, Xianxia let loose a low cry, and the devilish smoke bird that was circling around in the air above suddenly swooped down before flying directly toward the rock face. In the instant that the devilish smoke bird came into contact with the seemingly solid rock face, ripples ran through the sheer mountain face amid a dull thump. Immediately thereafter, its surface blurred before transforming into a layer of dense black mist. The entire rock face was the entrance to a massive cave, and the devilish smoke bird had passed through the black mist without any impediment. "Please wait for a moment, Senior. I'll get the devilish smoke bird to do some scouting first," Xianxia said in a cautious manner before sitting down in midair in a cross-legged manner, then closed her eyes while making a hand seal. A wisp of her spiritual sense had already been infused into the devilish smoke bird's body, and she was going to control it to assess the situation inside the cave first. Meanwhile, Han Li stood beside her with a contemplative look on his face, seemingly in deep thought about something. After a long while, the devilish smoke bird emerged from the black mist with a clear chirp before landing on Xianxia's shoulder, and the latter also opened her eyes at this moment. Luckily for us, the holy grey devilish beast in there is still in a deep slumber, so this is the best opportunity to strike. I'll get the devilish smoke bird to lead you directly to the devilish beast, Senior Han. However, the devilish chi in there is quite fierce, so even you won't be able to last very long in there. As such, it's best to kill the devilish beast in one fell swoop without alerting it, Xianxia said in a serious manner before pointing a finger up ahead. The small black bird flew into the black mist again at her behest, and Han Li appraised Xianxia for a while before nodding in a calm manner. He then made a hand seal, and golden light shimmered all over his body as a layer of thin golden scales appeared. Thus, he made his way into the black mist as a streak of golden light, and a contemplative look appeared on Xianxia's face upon seeing this. All of a sudden, a ball of azure light flew out from Xianxia's body, and it transformed into a fist-sized Kirin projection as it said, "It's about time we made our move as well." Xianxia shook her head and replied, "Let's wait for a while longer. Regardless of whether he can kill that holy grey devilish beast or not, the best opportunity for us to enter the true spirit cave will be while he's battling the beast." "Oh, you seem to be quite wary of him," the Kirin projection chuckled. "You've been in my body this entire time, so you must have also seen his displays of power. Even a 9th-tier upper-race devilish beast is no match for him. If I were to face him in a direct battle, I have zero confidence in my ability to win. If I'm not mistaken, even though that holy grey devilish beast is still in a deep slumber, it must have set up some defensive measures in advance, so it'll most likely be next to impossible to approach it without waking it up. We can only sneak in and open the true spirit cave during their battle," Xianxia analyzed in a calm voice. "You're right. Let's keep waiting for a bit then," the Kirin projection replied with a nod after a moment of deliberation. Meanwhile, Yue Zong was meditating inside a new cave that he'd dug into a mountain peak outside of the mountain ranges. All of a sudden, his expression changed drastically as he flipped his hand over to produce the box that contained the strange insect. As soon as the lid of the box was removed, the silkworm-like insect began to screech and thrash with all its might. Yue Zong drew a sharp breath upon seeing this, and he immediately flew out of the cave as a streak of white light. However, as soon as he emerged outside, his expression darkened significantly as he found himself standing directly before a silver-armored man with an extremely cold and aloof expression. It was the foreign being with the Gui surname with whom he'd been in conflict earlier. Yue Zong's heart sank, but he forced a smile onto his face as he asked, "I didn't expect to see you here, Senior. I thought some other devilish beast had appeared in the area. Do you have some business with me, Senior?" The silver-armored man appraised Yue Zong in a cold manner for a long while without saying anything before finally replying, "Where are the others?" "Others? There are no other people here aside from myself, Senior," Yue Zong replied in a relatively calm manner. "Is that so? In that case, I'll send you on your way." Crimson light flashed past the silver-armored man's face as a vicious look surfaced in his eyes. Yue Zong's expression changed drastically upon hearing this, and he immediately hurled the box in his hand toward the silver-armored man. Immediately thereafter, spiritual light flashed from within his sleeves, and several tens of talismans of different colors shot forth from within. At the same time, he opened his mouth to blast forth a white jade badge. The strange insect flew out of the box and swelled to around 10 feet in size before slithering toward the silver-armored being like a white snake. Meanwhile, the talismans all exploded into balls of light of different colors, while the Jade badge transformed into a cloud of white mist amid a dull thump, covering an area of around an acre and enshrouding the silver-armored man within. As for Yue Zhang himself, white light flashed beneath his feet as a pair of white wheels appeared, and his body swayed as he disappeared on the spot, only to reappear over 100 feet away from the cloud of white mist. After that, he fled the scene as a streak of white light. The silver-armored being chuckled coldly upon seeing this before suddenly laying a hand on the top of his own head, and his body blurred before manifesting 3 identical avatars. One of the avatars raised both arms into the air, and they transformed into a pair of crimson ghostly hands with sharp fingers and black chi revolving around them. The pair of hands grabbed onto the oncoming giant insect, then clenched together tightly, and the 10 fingers tore the insect into several segments as if they were sharp blades. Another avatar abruptly opened his mouth to expel a burst of crimson light, which swept up all of the oncoming balls of light in a frenzy. After that, the avatar inhaled violently, and the crimson light flashed as all of the balls of light were sucked into his stomach, along with a small portion of the white mist nearby. As for the final avatar, silver light flashed through his eyes, and he suddenly transformed into a silver worm that shot forth through the air. After just a single flash, the silver worm appeared in the air above Yue Zhang as if by instantaneous teleportation, then whipped its tail before grabbing downward with its massive claws in a menacing manner. Yue Zhang's face paled significantly upon seeing this, but he naturally wasn't going to just allow himself to be killed. A resounding boom erupted from his body, following which a pair of white bone flying swords shot forth from within. The flying swords had lightning flashing along their surfaces, and they appeared to be quite powerful as they swept toward the oncoming claws in a crisscross formation. The bone swords were able to keep the massive claws at bay for a split second, but they were then immediately shattered into 2 clean halves in the face of the enormous force being exerted upon them. Yue Zhang took advantage of this opportunity to expel a ball of blood essence that enshrouded his 2 feet, looking as if he were planning to use some kind of movement technique to aid him in his escape. However, a cold light flashed through the silver worm's eyes, and it opened its mouth to expel a crimson bead amid a clear ringing sound. The bead rotated on the spot before suddenly, emitting a vast expanse of dark crimson light, which caught Yue Zhang completely off guard and instantly inundated his body. He then essentially disintegrated into a puddle of blood before being gobbled up by the silver worm. Immediately thereafter, the silvery worm circled around while the other 2 avatars also rose into the air to meet it. The 3 avatars then combined in one, in an instant to form that silver-robed being again. However, he currently wore a contemplative look on his face, as if he were in deep thought about something. Those beings also appeared in this place. Could it be that they're after that as well? But there shouldn't be anyone else aware of that thing unless they're like me. HMPH. In any case, only I have a right to obtain that thing. I'll kill anyone who dares to stand in my way. The man murmured to himself with a ferocious look in his eyes. All of a sudden, he turned toward a certain direction and yelled, "Who's there? Come out right now." However, nothing emerged from that direction. The man's expression darkened as he abruptly raised a hand to hurl a silver flying saber through the air, and silver light flashed before a series of saber projections instantly descended upon that spot. However, even after all of the saber projections converged toward that spot, nothing was revealed to be there. A hint of surprise flashed through the silver-armored man's face upon seeing this, and a hint of confusion appeared on his face. After contemplating the situation for a moment, he let loose a cold harumph before making a hand seal. The silver flying dagger immediately returned to him as he behest before disappearing up his sleeve in a flash. After that, the man flew away as a streak of azure light, and complete silence returned to the area with the exception of the sound of a few gusts of gentle breeze blowing past. Some time later, faint silver light flashed in the air, and a petite humanoid figure appeared. This was a being who resembled a beautiful woman with a pair of pointy ears. It was none other than the devilish beast, Ju Yi. She looked on toward the direction that the silver-armored being had departed, and her brows furrowed as she murmured to herself, "Who was that? He's not the one who killed the young master, but he's quite powerful nonetheless. If it weren't for the fact that I used a secret technique to move my aura elsewhere in advance, I most likely wouldn't have been able to fool him. These outsiders are all far too powerful for me to deal with alone. I have to call for some reinforcements." As soon as her voice trailed off, the woman tore off a small tuft of fur from her tail before chanting something, then raising her hand up into the air. These strands of fur transformed into thin streaks of silver light that flew through the air, before disappearing into the distance after just a few flashes. The woman's expression eased slightly upon seeing this, and she then cast a hesitant gaze toward the mountain ranges where Han Li and the silver-armored being had disappeared before heaving a faint sigh. She made a hand seal, and her body blurred within the silver light again before vanishing into nothingness. Meanwhile, Han Li was following the devilish smoke bird as he slowly traversed through the dense black mist. The bird was chirping urgently from time to time as if it were urging him to pick up the speed, but Han Li merely ignored it and continued at his own leisurely pace. Thus, the devilish smoke bird had no choice but to slow down to accommodate his speed as it led him further on ahead. The devilish chi in the surrounding area was dense to the extreme, to the extent that one couldn't even see their 5 fingers if they were to hold their hand up in front of their face. It was as if this were the darkest pits of hell. However, with the golden light that was flashing from Han Li's body and the blue light that was shimmering in his eyes, he was able to see everything in the surrounding area with great clarity. At this moment, he was currently situated in a massive square passageway. The passageway was over 100 feet in both length and width, and the 4 surfaces were all paved with a type of inky black rock material that he'd never seen before. The dense devilish chi in the passageway was pouring out incessantly from none other than those rocks, and this Han Li quite curious about just what they were. If it weren't for the fact that a restriction could have potentially been cast onto these walls, he would have chipped off a few of the black rocks for further examination. This passageway wasn't just a singular one. Instead, it was part of a system of passageways that spread throughout the entire belly of the mountain like a maze, and the further one progressed, the deeper underground they went. Thus time passed by slowly. It hadn't taken the devilish smoke bird long to make a return trip last time, but Han Li had already been walking for quite a while, and there were still no signs to suggest that he was close to reaching the end. This made Han Li develop a sense of distrust and animosity toward the black bird. The devilish smoke bird seemed to have also sensed Han Li's discontent, but it couldn't do anything aside from continuing onward. After forging ahead for a while longer, the devilish smoke bird suddenly stopped up ahead, just as Han Li was contemplating turning back. Han Li's heart stirred upon seeing this, and he focused his gaze up ahead to find that the devilish chi there seemed to have thinned out significantly. Furthermore, there was a massive exit that was shimmering with white light right before his eyes. Han Li's expression finally eased slightly, and he took a deep breath before suddenly gesturing toward the devilish smoke bird. The bird had a wisp of Xianxia's spiritual sense within its body, so it was naturally quite intelligent, and a hint of confusion appeared in its eyes upon seeing this. However, after a brief hesitation, it still flew obediently toward Han Li. As soon as the bird reached the air above Han Li's head, he suddenly swept a sleeve upward, and a swath of gray light erupted forth like lightning before sweeping up the hapless bird in a flash. The devilish smoke bird was naturally quite stunned by this development, and it opened its beak to try and cry out. However, its voice was naturally unable to escape through the divine essence-effused light around it. At this moment, Han Li pointed a finger up ahead in a calm manner. An azure light flashed from his fingertip as an azure rune struck the immobilized devilish smoke bird's body. Azure light then swirled all over the entire bird before it disappeared within the gray light in a flash. After doing all that, Han Li dusted off his hands as a faint smile appeared on his face. However, in the next instant, he cast his gaze toward the exit, and a grim expression surfaced in his eyes. He suddenly opened his mouth to expel a ball of silver flames, which transformed into a silver fire raven in a flash. The fire raven flew around Han Li a few times before disappearing without a trace into a nearby wall. After that, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, and 72 small golden swords also shot forth in a soundless manner. These flying swords circled around in the air at Han Li's behest, then transformed into countless azure lotus flowers that appeared all over the passageway, only to disappear like soap bubbles in the next instant. After doing all that, Han Li paused momentarily before flipping a hand to produce 2 silver talismans. The talismans shot forth toward the ground below before transforming into a pair of faint golden shadows that disappeared underground. Those were none other than his two armor origin talismans. What he was about to face was a body integration stage devilish beast, and even though it had sustained severe injuries, Han Li still didn't dare to grow complacent in the slightest. Prior to making this journey, he had specifically refined some beveled silver talismans to take with him. The materials required to refine these talismans were all extremely precious, but in a super city like Cloud City, it was naturally possible to gather those materials as long as he had sufficient spirit stone. After making all of those preparations, a cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes and plastered a purple talisman onto his own body. Brilliant silver light flashed, and a ball of purple mist permeated forth, following which Han Li's body disappeared amid a flash of silver runes. As a safety precaution, he decided to use a high zenith invisibility talisman as well. After that, Han Li's insubstantial body drifted toward the exit, as if he really were about to try and slay the holy grade devilish beast. Outside the mountain, Xianxia let loose a cry of surprise in the instant that Han Li cast a restriction on the devilish smoke bird. The azure Kirin projection was rather startled by this, and it hurriedly raised its head as it asked, "What happened?" Xianxia exhaled with a hesitant look on her face as she replied, "My devilish smoke bird has been restricted by that person." "What? Why would he do that? Could it be that he's already noticed something?" the current projection asked with furrowed brows. "It's unlikely that he's noticed something. Perhaps he's simply very cautious in nature and doesn't wish for us to be able to conduct surveillance on him while he battles the holy grade devilish beast," Xianxia replied in an unconvincing voice. "In that case, things are a little troublesome for us. We don't know what's going on in there, so we won't be able to go in at the ideal opportunity," the Kirin projection said in a dark voice with a frustrated swipe of its tail. "I'm naturally aware of that as well, but we have no choice. Regardless of what's happening in there, let's go in right away as well. No matter how powerful he is, he's still just an upper race being, so there's no way that he'll be able to kill a holy grade devilish beast anytime soon. In any case, we'll have enough time to open the true spirit cave," Xianxia decided as she gritted her teeth. "Looks like that's our only choice. Let's go," the Kirin projection also quickly nodded in response. Thus, Xianxia flipped a hand over to produce a triangular badge. The badge was entirely black in color, and there was a black Kirin image on one side, while several silver runes had been inscribed onto the other side. "It's a pity that we have to use up this devilish Kirin badge. I had to go to great lengths to gather the materials, and I failed on many occasions before I finally managed to refine this one," Xianxia mused as she stroked the badge in a wistful manner. "No matter how precious that badge is, it can't compare with the things that lie in the true spirit cave. Only with that thing will you be able to avoid being rejected by the devilish chi in the cave, thereby allowing you to infiltrate with ease. With that hand-brat holding off the holy grade devilish beast for you, even if it notices that something's amiss, it won't be able to stop you from opening the true spirit cave," the Kirin projection urged. "Even so, this is a disposable item, and it's a huge waste to use it solely for aura concealment," Xianxia sighed with a wry smile. The Kirin projection rolled its eyes upon hearing this, and it was just about to say something when Xianxia's expression abruptly changed as she tossed the badge in her hand into the air. The badge rotated in midair, and fierce gusts of black winds were suddenly swept up. These gust winds were extremely unsettling, as a disconcerting low roar could be heard emanating from them, as if there were a giant beast lurking within them. Xianxia's expression darkened as she made one hand seal after another while raising her other wrist, then opening her mouth to expel a small azure sword. The sword revolved around her wrist as a streak of azure light, then flew back into her mouth, and a large amount of blood essence immediately gushed out of the gash that had just been inflicted on her wrist. "Go!" Xianxia let loose a low cry. The blood essence instantly converged to form a fist-sized crimson ball, before flying straight toward the gusts of fierce black winds. Strangely enough, after the ball of blood disappeared into the black winds, not only did the unsettling roaring come to an abrupt halt, even the ferocious winds themselves gradually abated. In the end, the black winds vanished in a flash, but an inky black Kirin that was around 10 feet in length had appeared in their place. The Kirin had black light flashing all over its body, and it was only an extremely blurry and indistinct projection. However, even in the face of a mere projection, Xianxia was carrying herself in an extremely careful manner. She pointed a finger into the air several times to conjure up one black rune after another, all of which disappeared into the black keyrin. The vicious light in the eyes of the menacing black keyrin instantly subsided as a result, and in the end, it transformed into a ball of black light that hurtled through the air, encapsulating both the azure keyrin projection and Xianxia within the black light. It's a good thing that I still remember where this keyrin perished, so we were able to use a hint of residual corpse chi from its remains to refine this treasure. Due to the fact that the two of us are interconnected, you also possess the aura of a keyrin within your body. Otherwise, not only would you have been unable to use this treasure, you would have suffered backlash from it as well, the azure keyrin projection chuckled. That's why I didn't want to part with this treasure. In a dire situation, this treasure could save my life, Xianxia lamented with a wry smile. However, after her voice fell, she didn't hesitate any longer as her body swayed, and she disappeared into the devilish chi while enveloped by black light. Unbeknownst to the two of them, not long after they'd entered the devilish chi, a fist-sized gray rock suddenly flew up from halfway up a nearby mountain. The rock then shattered to reveal a shimmering golden beetle, which also flew into the passageway in a soundless manner. Meanwhile, Han Li had emerged from the passageway and appeared in the entrance of a large hall. He focused his gaze up ahead to find that this was a circular hall with a diameter of over 1,000 feet. At the very center of the hall was a golden formation that was over 300 feet in size, around which stood 12 black stone pillars that were each several tens of feet tall. There were some menacing images of demons and devils carved onto stone pillars, and bursts of inky black devilish chi were pouring forth from these images, drifting toward the center of the formation in unison. At the center of the formation was a massive crimson bed, upon which was a huge black ape that was several tens of feet in size. The devilish ape's fangs were completely bared, and its limbs were remarkably long. On top of that, it had 3 shimmering yellow twisted horns on its head. There was a purple scar on his chest that was around the size of a human head, and through it, several ribs and an inky black beating heart could be seen. The massive ape's eyes were tightly shut, and black light was flashing all around it, slowly absorbing the surrounding devilish chi into its body. At the same time, a layer of crimson mist was being emitted by the large bed that the ape was lying on, and that mist was also surging into its body incessantly. Han Li stood at the entrance and looked on coldly at the scenes unfolding within the hall, displaying no intentions to spring into action whatsoever. At this moment, his body was in an insubstantial stage, so even if someone were standing right next to him, it would still be quite difficult for them to detect him. However, according to Xianxia's description, this giant ape was a being at somewhere around the mid-body integration stage, so Han Li couldn't be sure that his high-zenith invisibility talisman would be able to fool it. As such, he was maintaining his distance from the devilish ape while standing still on the spot, surveying the situation in silence. However, after the golden beetle had flown out from the rock on the mountain, Han Li's expression changed slightly, and a cold light flashed through his eyes before they reverted back to normal. Back before he'd entered the passageway, he'd kept a gold-devouring beetle outside as a safety precaution. Of course, this beetle had been imbued with a wisp of his spiritual sense, and it was one of the beetles that had undergone mutation after devouring a portion of that mysterious stone block. After devouring the stone block, the mutated gold-devouring beetles' bodies had become extraordinarily hard and heavy. Further, following the research and experiments he'd conducted during the past few years, he discovered that the beetles had also attained a new ability, a stone form ability. This mutated ability was something that he'd unwittingly discovered while cultivating his own spiritual sense. After burrowing into soil or stone, these mutated gold-devouring beetles could emit strange bursts of earth-attribute spiritual power, thereby allowing them to fuse as one with the earth around them. As such, unless someone was aware of the exact hiding spot of the beetles in advance, or had cultivated a spirit eye technique that could see through their disguise, no one would be able to notice that anything was amiss as long as the beetles continued to hide within the rock or stone, regardless of how powerful their spiritual sense was. It was exactly because of this that Han Li had been willing to enter the mountain on his own. Due to the obstruction from the devilish chi, he wasn't able to glean exactly what Xianxia was doing through the gold-devouring beetle. However, even though his rather murky spiritual sense detection, he learned that she hadn't just been waiting outside as she claimed she would, and was instead doing something rather suspicious. Han Li wasn't overly surprised by this discovery. He'd already speculated that she may have been hiding something after she'd offered to repair the heavenly devilish armor in exchange for just some holy-grade devilish beast materials. It was quite clear that this woman was no ordinary crystal being, so holy-grade devilish beast materials shouldn't be worth making the effort and taking the risk for her, especially when she couldn't even have the most valuable devilish core. On top of that, she was even presenting a treasure like the heavenly devilish armor to him. After entering the Golden Devil mountain ranges, their group had encountered several extremely perilous scenarios, but Xianxia had shown no signs of wanting to give up, and that only further fueled Han Li's suspicions. Now that he had confirmed that she harbored ulterior motives, he wasn't actually enraged at all. As long as Xianxia didn't do anything to hurt his interests and could repair the heavenly devilish armor using the holy-grade devilish core as she proclaimed, he didn't really care if she had some other objectives. Of course, if she were going after something that was sufficiently tempting, even to him, he wouldn't mind stepping in to get a share for himself. Xianxia did indeed possess some special abilities and treasures, but at her lowly cultivation base, Han Li was confident that he'd be able to control her at all times. At this point, he had stood at the entrance and observed for around 10 minutes. During this time, he was able to ascertain that aside from the formation on the ground and the 12 pillars around it, there were no other restrictions in the room. Furthermore, this giant ape had indeed been severely wounded and was in a state of deep slumber. In that case, prior to ascertaining just what Xianxia was plotting, he didn't mind securing the holy-grade devilish core first. As long as he didn't have to face the beast in a direct confrontation, he was confident in his ability to kill it in one fell swoop with a sneak attack. With that in mind, a cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and he finally decided to act. He took a deep breath before rustling both sleeves at once. An azure light flashed as a dozen or so azure beads appeared in one of his hands, while a thick stack of talismans appeared in the other. He tossed both batches of items forward, and they hovered before him in a stationary manner. After that, golden light flashed from his body, and 2 fist-sized golden beetles emerged. After doing all that, Han Li made a hand seal, and his body slowly withdrew out of its insubstantial form. During this process, he appraised the giant black ape in the hall with an intense, unblinking gaze, and the devilish ape remained completely still on the bed, displaying no reaction to Han Li's actions whatsoever. A solemn look appeared on Han Li's face as he pointed a finger at the stack of talismans, and they instantly drifted toward all corners of the hall, then disappeared in silence amid a flash of silver light. Meanwhile, the dozen or so beads were also slowly flying toward the black pillars. After flying to the tops of these round pillars, the azure beads all drew to a halt just before they flew into the giant formation. Thus, each of them hovered several feet above their respective pillar and remained still on the spot. The 2 gold-devouring beetles had also flown to just over 100 feet away from the formation in a wraith-like manner at his behest, and both of them were hovering in midair in a menacing manner. After doing all that, Han Li glanced at the black devilish ape to find that it still hadn't displayed any reactions. After a brief hesitation, he suddenly raised a hand toward one corner of the hall, and spiritual light flashed as a silver fire raven appeared out of thin air, then spread its wings and vanished on the spot. In the next instant, the fire raven appeared in a discreet manner directly above the giant formation, before hanging completely motionlessly in midair. Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D41E, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D41E. Letter 1D41C, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D696. Han Li wore a rather grave expression, but he acted in a quick and decisive manner as he transmitted an instruction to the silver fire raven using his spiritual sense. The fire raven immediately opened its beak at his behest to expel a thin golden and silver thread. It was none other than the revolving evil spirit light. The thin thread flew through the air at an extraordinarily fast speed, reaching the formation down below almost as soon as it flew out of the fire raven's beak. However, as expected, the giant formation was not just a useless ornamental display. A buzzing sound rang out within the hall, following which a crimson light barrier suddenly appeared above the formation, shielding the giant ape's body within. However, the thin golden and silver thread merely punctured through the light barrier, as if it didn't even exist, then abruptly appeared right above the devilish ape's head. It appeared that the thin thread was about to puncture the ape's large head in the next instant, and Han Li looked on from afar with bated breath. All of a sudden, a suit of purple armor suddenly appeared, covering every single inch of its entire body. The thin thread struck the visor of the armor, which was an exact mold of the devilish ape's face, only to be repelled amid a loud metallic clang. Han Li's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and he immediately relinquished all attempts to remain stealthy and discreet as golden light flashed from his body. Immediately thereafter, a golden projection with 3 heads and 6 arms appeared above his head, and he chanted something internally as 2 of the 3 heads abruptly opened their eyes. A cold light flashed through the 2 pairs of eyes, following which the 6 arms of the projection came together in 3 groups of 2. Golden light flashed within the projection's shimmering golden hands, and 3 rather blurry giant swords appeared. The 3 swords were all antiquated in design, with runes flashing over their surfaces, but all of them were of different colors and styles. One of them was as thin as paper and flashing with golden light. Another one was narrow, yet extremely long and shimmering with azure light. And the final one was an extremely thick, dull sword that was completely inky black in color. Slash, Han Li commanded in a barely audible voice. The golden projection instantly made hand seals with its 3 spare hands before pointing toward the distance in unison, and 3 sword projections of different colors flew through the air before combining as one, forming a 3-colored streak of light that hurtled directly toward the giant black ape. Almost at the exact same time, the 12 azure beads hovering above the black pillars came crashing down, and azure light flashed as they exploded amid a string of earth-shattering booms. Loud thunderclaps rang out in rapid succession, and not only did the 12 black pillars fall in the face of the azure lightning, even the entire formation had been entirely inundated by arcs of lightning. The light barrier clashed with the arcs of azure lightning, and the purple light barrier was shattered amid an agonized screech almost instantaneously before countless arcs of azure lightning rained down in a torrential downpour. At the same time, the 2 golden beetles and 3 sword projections shot forth in unison, hoping to land a lethal blow amid the chaos. Setting aside the gold-devouring beetles, the 3 sword projections were an ability that Han Li had attained after combining his Provenance True Devil arts and different types of true essence. This secret technique could unleash the powers of his Provenance True Devil arts, Azure Essence Sword art, and Vajra arts all at once through the Provenance True Devil projection. The Provenance True Devil arts and Azure Essence Sword art weren't worthy of note, but the Vajra arts was a body refinement cultivation method, so it was extremely rare to be able for someone to be able to project the true essence imbued within the cultivation art in this manner. Han Li had coined the name Trisent Slash for this ability, due to the fact that the 3 types of true essence were all different and complemented one another. Their combined power was far superior to just the sum of their constituent parts. The slash that had just been unleashed had exhausted close to half of the true essence within Han Li's body, and even though the 3-colored sword projection had been compressed to a completely ordinary-looking state, it possessed devastating power that could virtually split mountains and part oceans. With all of the other attacks that Han Li had also prepared, if the black devilish ape were to take everything head-on, Han Li was 70% confident that it would be killed on the spot. At this moment, the azure arcs of lightning struck the giant ape's suit of purple armor first, yet an unexpected turn of events suddenly unfolded within the formation. The runes all over the crimson bed lit up in unison, emitting a piercing crimson light that shielded the armored ape within. The powerful arcs of lightning struck the crimson light in a frenzy, but the light barrier only tremored slightly in the face of such an astonishingly powerful attack, yet remained completely unscathed. However, in the next instant, the 3-colored sword projection and the 2 golden beetles also crashed into the crimson light barrier in quick succession. A resounding boom rang out as the entire hall tremored violently and was instantly inundated by lights of different colors. What appeared to be an extremely dazzling rainbow sun then rose up from the center of the formation, yet Han Li didn't falter in the slightest as a hint of blue light flashed through his eyes. All of a sudden, he pointed toward the distance while making a hand seal with his other hand to spur the golden projection above his head into action. Before the explosions in the hall had even subsided, the spirit-engulfing fire raven let loose a clearly cry and folded its wings against its sides as it plunged headfirst into the ball of light. Silver flames immediately appeared within the scorching sun before disappearing in a flash. Meanwhile, the giant swords in the hands of the golden projection disappeared, only to be replaced by balls of golden light that were sent flying through the air. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D452, letter 1D626, letter 1D638, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B8, letter 2134, letter 1D628. A gust of fierce golden winds was swept up amid a resounding boom, sweeping through the entire hall. A burst of enormous wind pressure proliferated toward all directions from the very center, and even though Han Li was standing quite far away near the entrance, he was still forced back a couple of steps by this immense pressure. All of a sudden, his expression changed slightly, and the golden projection above his head ceased in its attacks. At the same time, Han Li swept both sleeves through the air to summon a layer of gray light, as well as a swath of give-colored flames that encapsulated his entire body. Furthermore, a small crystalline shield had also flown out of his sleeve, before positioning itself directly in front of him. After that, Han Li stood silently on the spot and looked on with a grave expression. Even with his spirit eye ability, he wasn't able to see anything through the flurry of exploding lights, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong. Regardless of what kind of severe injuries the devilish ape had sustained, it was very strange that it would remain completely silent in the face of these attacks. Even if he had managed to slay the devilish ape, a body integration stage being definitely wouldn't pass away in such a peaceful manner. With that in mind, Han Li released his spiritual sense to try and make sense of what was happening. However, right at this moment, a burst of cackling suddenly rang out from within the hall. Han Li's heart stirred as he instantly withdrew his spiritual sense, then cast his gaze into the golden winds. All of a sudden, an ear-splitting boom rang out, and the fierce golden winds were dispersed from the inside, along with the massive ball of light amid a flash of countless thin purple lines. The two then both disappeared amid a rumbling explosion. Thus, the center of the giant formation was revealed, and Han Li focused his gaze up ahead, only for his eyelids to twitch involuntarily at the sight that he was greeted by. The entire purple formation had been completely demolished. It was riddled with countless pits and craters, and a part of it had even disappeared. A massive gulf that was around 10 feet wide had also appeared at the center of the formation, virtually splitting the ground in the hall in half. However, what was quite alarming to Han Li was that the crimson bed was situated directly in the path of the huge gulf, but it remained completely unscathed. At this moment, a massive humanoid figure had sat up on the bed, and it was none other than the purple-armored devilish ape. Aside from the 3 golden horns on its head, every single inch of its body had been covered by the suit of armor. Even its eyes were concealed beneath a pair of white crystals on the visor, making it impossible to glean emotions from the ape. Looking at it from afar, the ape appeared to be a massive metallic puppet. However, the suit of purple armor hadn't emerged without any damage. Not only had many sections of it been cracked and shattered, there were several parts that had already been melted and charred black. At this moment, the ape was holding onto a shimmering golden object in each of its armored hands, and they were none other than Han Li's 2 mature gold-devouring beetles. The 2 beetles weren't backing down, either. Both of them were gnawing on a finger each, displaying no intention of letting go. Han Li didn't know what kind of material this suit of armor had been refined from, but it was quite extraordinary that it was able to withstand such astonishing attacks and even keep the gold-devouring beetles at bay for now. It was quite clear that the devilish ape was extremely wary of these 2 beetles, making sure go grab a hold of them even at the expense of a finger or 2. Otherwise, if these beetles were to exploit a chink in its armor and burrow into its body, it would be in a lot of trouble. However, none of this was what Han Li's attention was focused on at the moment. Instead, his gaze had fallen upon a shimmering object that was hovering before the giant ape. This was a segment of a blade that was around half a foot in length. The top half of the blade was nowhere to be seen, and it was shimmering with purple light. The entire segment of the blade was semi-transparent, and there seemed to be something moving around incessantly within it. Han Li's eyes narrowed as he focused his gaze on the object within the purple blade, quickly discovering that it was a creature that resembled both a worm, yet also a phoenix. At first glance, this creature bore a slight resemblance to the winged worms of the Jiao Kai race, but upon closer inspection, one would find that they were completely different. Even though both had massive wings and bodies that were similar to worms, this creature's wings were covered in purple scales and were devoid of any fur. Furthermore, this creature had 2 pairs of wings as opposed to 1, with one pair being bigger than the other. What was even more eye-catching was the remarkably long golden horn that was growing on its nose, which gave the creature a rather comical appearance. However, laughing was the last thing on Han Li's mind, as his pupils contracted drastically. Every time the unknown creature moved, the blade would move as well, and the enormous spiritual pressure emanating from it was quite astonishing, even to Han Li. This was a damaged blade, yet it still possessed such astonishing spiritual pressure. If it were fully intact, it would be an insanely powerful weapon. It appeared that even though the holy grade devilish beast had been severely wounded, these extraordinary treasures in its possession made it quite a difficult opponent to face. Just as these thoughts were racing through Han Li's mind, the cackling coming from within the purple suit of armor drew to an abrupt halt, and black chi flashed from the suit of armor before the giant ape stood up on the bed, then strode down from it in a wobbly manner. Han Li's lips twitched as he suddenly made a grabbing motion, and countless pea-sized balls of silver flames peered out of thin air around the devilish ape before raining down upon it in a torrential downpour. At the same time, spiritual light flashed from the walls of the hall, following which hundreds of talismans emerged before abruptly vanishing. A shimmering silver light formation appeared in the air above the giant ape, and a massive palatial projection surfaced within the silver light, as if the giant ape had been teleported to an ethereal realm. The entire palace was shimmering with silver light, and countless runes were dancing around it while delightful heavenly music was emanating from within. However, if one were to focus on the music and really try to listen to it, the music would suddenly fade. This was the Nine Palaces' heavenly talismans, and the light formation rotated on the spot before blasting forth a pillar of silver light. In the blink of an eye, 2 attacks had reached the devilish ape, yet it made no effort to take evasive measures. A burst of cackling rang out from behind the visor yet again, and it merely clenched a fist before swiping an arm through the air. A burst of black chi immediately erupted from its body amid a resounding boom, and all of the oncoming balls of silver flames were instantly snuffed out. The pillar of silver light descending from above was also stalled and prevented from traveling downward any further by the wave of black chi. Han Li's expression darkened upon seeing this, and he immediately made a hand seal. The heavenly music within the light formation instantly increased in volume, while the palatial projection swelled to several times its original size, then plummeted directly toward the devilish ape from the light formation. The palatial projection was extremely lifelike, and it was emanating an astonishing aura of superiority. The devilish ape raised its head to look up at the projection, following which the blade segment before it moved slightly, sending a thin and long purple streak slashing through the air. The purple light flashed past, and both the palatial projection as well as the light formation up above were both sliced in half before disappearing in a flash. Han Li's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, yet before he had a chance to do anything else, the blade segment suddenly aimed itself at Han Li before moving slightly again. Another purple streak appeared before his eyes, and at the same time, the seemingly slow and sluggish devilish ape's body blurred as it abruptly disappeared on the spot. In the next instant, purple light flashed, and the armored ape appeared beside Han Li before launching a massive fist directly at his head. There were 2 light barriers around Han Li's body, yet his ears were still struck by a ringing sensation even before the fist had made contact. An invisible sound wave had pierced through the light barriers before hurtling directly into his ears. Crack! Boom! 2 different sounds rang out from within the hall almost in unison, and the purple streak flashed past, while a powerful sound wave swept over the spot where Han Li was standing.